Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, good. I can. Hi. It's really an honor to be with all of you. We've been trying to make this happen for quite some time, and so I just want to start with my thank you to your president, David Malat. Thank you for beginning to build this relationship over the course of time, and you knew eventually I would make my way here. So I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to Lindsay and to Rabbi Brett Critchever, and to everyone here at CTS and the Faith in Action Project. I'm thrilled to be with you today. So I want to start by telling you a story. In Talmudic times, there was a rabbi around 3rd century Common Era, and he would often hire day laborers to work in his winery. He was a pretty wealthy guy. One day, one of these day laborers, a porter, accidentally broke one of his very expensive barrels of wine while he was transporting it from one place to another. Maybe the laborers were reckless that day. Maybe they didn't take proper precautions. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they stumbled, or maybe the barrels were just too heavy for them. Either way, they were responsible for the damages according to the law, and it was a significant loss that Rabbi Bar Chana suffered. So the rabbi took their overcoats as compensation for his loss. Now, the laborers were devastated. So they went to another rabbi, because there's always another rabbi you can go to. This one was Rav. He was one of the greatest Talmudic rabbinic authorities of the time. And they reported what had just happened. And Rav is full of fury. He goes and he approaches his colleague, Rabbi Bar Chana, and he says, "Give them back their coats." Rabbi Bar Chana responds, "Am I required to give them back their coats by the law?" Of course, he knew that he was not required by the law to do so. The law rested firmly on his side. They had broken his property. He was able to take compensation. "Yes," Rav answered, "you are liable by the law." And then he quoted to his colleague from the book of Proverbs, which is hardly a legally authoritative source, "You are to walk in the way of the good." Rabbi Bar Chana was not happy about this ruling, but he wasn't in the mood to fight, so he returned the garments to the laborers. But then the laborers went back to Rav, and they said, "We're poor. We worked all day long. We're starving. We have nothing." And so Rav went back to his colleague, Rabbi Bar Chana, and he demanded that he pay the workers for their entire salary for the day. Again, Rabbi Bar Chana questioned the ruling. Am I required to do so by the law? Of course, he knew he was not. He hired them to do a job. They failed to do the job. The barrel never got from point A to point B. Why should they get their full day's salary nevertheless? "Yes," Rav responded, "it is the law." And he went on to quote the second part of that same verse from the book of Proverbs. "You should walk the path of righteousness." You know, you invited me here from Los Angeles to share with you Jewish perspectives on labor and the value of work in the Jewish tradition and our approaches to poverty mitigation efforts and how they connect with the fight against systemic injustice. I want to explore with you this morning why Rav insisted on holding Rabbi Bar Chana to such a high standard when he could have chosen to stick to the letter of the law rather than its most expansive obligations. I want to share with you some of the vast rabbinic literature on this subject and highlight the work of some of my colleagues, in particular Rabbi Jill Jacobs, Rabbi Aryeh Cohen, Noam Sion, and others who have written extensively on Jewish approaches to these questions. I hope that you will leave this morning with a clear sense that labor and laborers are valued in Judaism, that employers are expected to cultivate relationships of respect and concern with their workforce, and that they are held to the highest possible standard of accountability toward those laborers. I want to impress upon you that work is considered in our Jewish tradition, as President Malat already said, holy. For 6 days of the week, we are called to engage the world, to work with all of our might, and on the 7th day, to rest. I want to impart to you that in my tradition, poverty reflects poorly not on the person suffering from it, but on the society that allows it. But in order to understand all of this, we have to take several steps back and explore some of the more foundational questions about what it means to be a human being in the Jewish tradition. So I want to begin with a very personal story, one that took place about 25 years ago when I was living in New York City. So it was one weekend. I was midway through rabbinical school studying at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And my husband David and I went on a last-minute backpacking trip with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law into this dense, isolated New York State forest. We navigated 2 miles of very steep switchbacks in order to get to the top where we were promised incredible views. And I'm sure it would have been beautiful, except the minute that we finally got up to the top, we were at this campsite. It was a tiny clearing in the wood. It was covered by flat rock and surrounded by 60-foot trees, and it started to pour. And we were caught in a severe thunderstorm. Over the next several hours, we faced pounding rain and hurricane force winds, and the news later reported on the storm, calling it rapid fire lightning and balls of hail. We knew we couldn't make it back down that night, so we had to do our very best to stay safe, totally isolated, totally defenseless to the forces of nature. By the time we got back the next morning, went down the mountain and made it back into the city. It was bright and sunny out as if nothing had happened the night before. And we learned that we had survived a storm that was so severe that it tore roofs off of buildings and down power lines across the state. It was truly a miracle that we had not been hit. So I got home, climbed the stairs of my New York City apartment, collapsed on the couch, and I turned on the TV. And the lead story in the local news when we got home was about a young woman, 19 years old, who had died tragically that morning in the aftermath of this storm. Layla and her baby brother were sitting at a concrete picnic table outside their Bronx apartment when a massive tree that had been weakened by the previous night's storm came bearing down on them. And she dove to protect her little brother, to push him to safety, and she was crushed by the tree. It was only hours after this terrible tragedy had occurred, and already camera crews were crowded into Layla's home, and they were broadcasting her distraught mother, Denise, who was weeping and wailing, my baby, what am I going to do? How am I even going to pay for your funeral? And I totally froze. We were out there all night. We had been totally unprotected from the elements. We were surrounded by wet rock and these towering trees. And yet somehow we had made it home safely while this woman, by all accounts, a hero, died because the morning after the storm, she took her little brother out in order to get some fresh air. I couldn't shake the feeling that it easily could have been me. It took me a couple of phone calls to connect with Denise, the bereaved mother. I told her I was a seminary student. I asked her if I could come and see her, and she invited me to come right over. Denise was shattered by this loss, and she was open to any support she could get, and she took me into her home and into her heart. We prayed together. I have to say, she in many ways taught me how to pray, because at the Jewish Theological Seminary, we're used to praying from books, not from closing our eyes and opening our hearts and speaking to the Holy One. She talked about her baby boy's trauma from the accident. She shared pictures and memories of her beautiful daughter. And I went back to seminary, and I shared Denise's story with my classmates, and they stepped up. And within hours, we raised thousands of dollars to pay for Layla's burial. The tree that killed Layla, it turned out, had been menacing residents of her housing project for over a decade. It would creak and sway with every storm. And the residents had called city officials numerous times to complain. A couple of years earlier, Denise herself had called a city official. And she said to him, "What are you going to do? Wait until this tree falls and kills someone?" But alas, it turned out that removing a rotting tree from public housing in the Bronx was not a big priority for the city. That is, until the day after Layla's death, when they finally found the time and the fallen tree was hauled away. Denise was advised that she had a strong claim against the city, so she decided to sue. She was fueled by a sense of injustice. She was driven by a commitment to provide for Layla's own baby son, who was just a toddler when the accident happened. And this case should have been open and shut. There were witnesses, there were news reports, there were records of the phone calls from concerned residents over the years. I'm telling this whole story because I want you to know what happened one day shortly after this occurred. Denise excitedly calls me after hanging up with a city attorney. They offered her a preemptive settlement. It was a few $1,000s. Now, Denise had just told me the week before that the phone company had threatened to disconnect her line because she was so behind in her payments, having found it very hard to go back to work while she was grieving. I really wondered if she was going to accept this offer, but she proudly reported that she declined. I told that fancy attorney, "Thank you, but no thank you," she said. As Denise told it, the city attorney was shocked. "Listen to me," he said. "Your daughter was a single black teenage mother living in the projects. Take the money, pay your bills, and be done with this thing." Denise took a deep breath and she responded, "You have no idea who my daughter was or who she could have become. She could have been the first black woman president of the United States. I will see you in court." Years later, I moved west to California, and Denise and I sadly fell out of touch, so I don't actually know how the case resolved. But I know that the force of her love and her fierce moral clarity helped me, a seminary student, understand the most important theological principle of the Jewish faith. This is the very first thing that we learn about human beings in the beginning of the book of Genesis. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzelmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara'oto. And God created Adam, the first being, in the divine image, creating it in the image of God. Our rabbis wonder, why did God start with only one being? What are we to learn from this? And the Mishnah, an ancient compendium of Jewish law that was codified around the year 220 CE, addresses this through an exhortation that judges are to offer witnesses who are testifying in a capital case. This is the context. Beware, they're saying. Even though the death penalty is severely circumscribed and highly unlikely to ever be carried out under Jewish law, even still, your testimony today might result in a person's death. So know this, know what a person is in the eyes of our Jewish tradition. And I want to say that I am deeply indebted to one of my teachers, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who teaches this as one of the foundational texts of the Jewish rabbinic tradition, and his understanding of it has shaped the way a whole generation of rabbis engage this idea. There are three things that we learn from this Mishnah. First, that every single human being has infinite worth. That first person, Adam, was created singly in order to teach us that had he been struck down, none of his descendants would ever have been born. A whole world would have been lost. And conversely, saving Adam's life would have meant saving all of his descendants. Thus, the rabbis conclude that anyone who destroys even a single life, it's as if that person has destroyed an entire world. That line might sound familiar to some of you. It appears at the end of Schindler's List as the descendants of the Jews who Oskar Schindler saved from the gas chambers line up to pay respects at his grave. And there is a corollary to that teaching that is taught in the Quran in the context of the story of Cain and Abel. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg calls this the dignity of inestimable worth. He asks us to imagine the great care that we might take with a precious piece of art. Think of Da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, which recently sold for $450 million. It would be unthinkable that we would abandon such a piece of art outside of our home, leaving it vulnerable to robbery or vandalism, to wind or to rain, and yet we leave millions of human beings, each one worth far more than any piece of art, on the street, vulnerable to those same elements every day. In my city, in Los Angeles, 42,000 images of God slept on the street last night. This is a stain on our collective conscience. A person's worth applies not only to their procreative potential, but also to the reverberative impact that every one of us has throughout the course of our lives. Every person holds endless potential. And when a human life is taken, that potential is tragically and definitively cut short. Case in point, my friend Denise, you have no idea who my daughter could have become. Now, that should be all that we need to know. The first and most important lesson, every single person has innate dignity, infinite worth, inestimable worth. Now go treat them that way. This teaching is a radical, powerful corrective to the oppression and exploitation that are normalized in our society. Every single person holds endless potential, not only for the children they might bear, but for the ideas they might share, for the art that they might inspire, for the simple wonder of their lives. This isn't some hollow platitude. This is a radical intervention. This is a moral revolution. And even still, the rabbinic judges intuited that the witnesses would invariably apply that weighty lesson only in the most limiting way, recognizing virtue and worth in those who look like us, talk like us, vote like us, pray like us. Mother Teresa once wrote that the problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family too small. In ancient times, like now, our natural instinct is to fail to see the image of the Holy One in the other, to fail to recognize these most sublime ideas when they apply to people outside of our small circle of family. And so the rabbis offer a second lesson, one designed to challenge this deeply rooted cultural bias. Adam's singular creation means that all people share the same earthly lineage, just as we all share the same God, even if we call the divine by different names. Every one of us is a descendant of Adam. So don't you dare think that you or your people possess innate value over others. You are no more worthy or less than any other. I wish that juries were given these instructions before their deliberations in our time. The rabbis are making the argument here for the dignity of equality possessed by every person. This means no individual or group, no movement or nationality, race or class of people is fundamentally superior to any other. This is, as my dear friend Rabbi Shai Held says, the utter incompatibility of religion and racism. This is the ultimate proof text against white supremacy, or any other supremacy for that matter. Think of what this means. The Bible has been cynically manipulated for millennia to justify some of the bloodiest and most violent movements in human history. Slavery, war, terror, persecution, humiliation, exploitation, domination. All of this is a shameful perversion, an act of theological violence. But the ancients cry out, why did God start with only one person? For the sake of peace among nations, in order to teach us that we, all of us, are created in God's own image and we are created equal. Finally, the rabbinic judges assert that it's not enough that we're all worthy and that we're all fundamentally equal. You must know this, they say. Every single person is unique, different from anyone who has ever lived before or who ever will. When coins are minted in the treasury, they say, each one is identical to the next. But the Holy One created all of humanity from one mold, the mold of Adam HaRishon, Adam, that first person. And look at how vastly different we are from one another. What greater testament could there be to God's glory? And it's for all of these reasons this teaching concludes that every person is to arise each day and affirm, for my sake the world was created. Because without my voice, my spirit, my heart, my wisdom, my eccentricities, my contribution, surely the world would be impoverished. That's the ancient rabbis doing some truth-telling. And they really meant it. A few centuries later, a midrash, a rabbinic story from the 9th century, declares that every person is surrounded, wherever she goes, by a procession of angels crying out, "Make way, for an image of the Holy One is approaching." Every single person like royalty. Imagine that. And yet, again and again, the image of the Holy One is controlled and contained, humiliated and degraded, incarcerated and incapacitated, shot and killed before our very eyes. How do we keep missing all of those angels? with their trumpets and their proclamations desperate to rouse us to the dignity of every single human being. The call to awaken to the image of God, to the innate dignity of every person, has been the driving force of my religious life, the very heart of my faith. Our Jewish tradition treats this not as some abstract theological claim, but as a genuine moral imperative. What would it mean to build a society in which every person was treated as an image of the divine? How would this affect our relationships with our neighbors and coworkers, with the stranger lying beneath the dirty blankets and discarded cups outside of Starbucks? Wouldn't this compel us to build schools and organizations and faith communities that are truly welcoming and inclusive and just? How would it impact public policy and payout disparities and negligent lawsuits brought before the city? Would it not inspire ambitious social programs to protect those most vulnerable to exploitation and abuse? What would it mean about our law enforcement and our criminal justice systems, where judgment is too often rendered based on whether a person is black or white, rich or poor, rather than guilty or innocent? There's a story that's taught about Rabbi Israel Salanter, who lived in the late 1800s. He once visited a new matzah bakery, requesting kosher certification. The rabbi walked all around the plant, and he carefully reviewed all of the manufacturing protocols, and he observed the employees at work. Even though the machinery and the ingredients were all in accordance with the highest kashrut standards, the highest kosher standards, he nevertheless refused to grant them certification. They asked him why. He said, "I don't like the way management treats the laborers." How could food be considered kosher when the dignity of the workers is trampled daily? Another time, that same rabbi was asked what demands particular attention when baking matzah for the holiday of Passover. He answered, "One must be scrupulous not to yell at the women kneading the dough. They too are created in God's own image." The call to recognize the divine in every person, it might read like some beautiful but naive fantasy in our time. In fact, the failure to honor human dignity is actually a very old spiritual sickness. The Torah and the rabbis are so worried that we will fail to meet this mark, that we're given a portrait of a fully failed society, a warning of what happens when a society violates the dignity of its inhabitants. For centuries, religious communities have associated the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah with homosexuality, a deeply consequential exegetical choice that has rendered the story of these cities in Genesis 18, in the words of my friend Bishop Gene Robinson, a text of terror. To this day, the manipulation of this ancient text into pretext for suppression, dehumanization, and violence against LGBTQ people causes immeasurable harm. And it distracts from the story's urgent and eternal warning about a society whose moral failings map onto ours with notable precision. So here's how the Jewish tradition reads the great sin of these two ancient cities. Sodom and Gomorrah were abundant in natural resources, blooming oases in the middle of the desert. The lands were so rich with vegetation that it was said that bread emerged from the earth in Sodom with the dust of gold. But as often happens in places of natural abundance, they were fueled by a spirit of scarcity. The people who lived in that place only cared to safeguard their own riches. Outsiders will only try to divest us of what's rightfully ours, they said. Come, let us eradicate foreigners from our land. And so they did. They forcibly deported foreigners. They sealed off their borders. No one would deprive them of what was rightfully theirs. But then they realized that it wasn't enough to criminalize outsiders, those who sought a better life in their midst. They began to cheat their own poor, to target their own most vulnerable. The rabbis tell stories of egregious violence that was committed in the city of Sodom. Already back then, their xenophobia was matched by their misogyny. They not only lied and cheated and stole, they took sadistic pleasure in violating and dehumanizing women. In Sodom and Gomorrah, the people's worst inclination were propped up by a legal system, a high court, the rabbis say, of habitual liars and perverters of justice. Imagine. Lawmakers passed zero-tolerance policies that meted out torture to anyone who exhibited the slightest compassion for a struggling neighbor. In Sodom, it was decreed, whoever hands a piece of bread to a pauper or a stranger shall be burned at the stake. These rulings were a striking ideological precursor to the Fugitive Slave Act in the United States, which imposed harsh punishments not only on enslaved people who attempted to escape, but also on anyone assisting fugitives, and a century later to Nazi laws threatening the death penalty to anyone who provided safe haven, food, or transport to Jews. Laws like these, of course, fueled a culture in ancient times, as in modern, of distrust, betrayal, and callousness, neighbor against neighbor, a cynical, concerted effort to quash human goodness. Now, as we know, Abraham's nephew, Lot, lived in one of those terrible cities. He was an unremarkable fellow. On one hand, he did not share the depravity of his neighbors, but he also seemed to have no problem living in their midst. And like so many people living in an unjust society, he kept his head down and he kept his mouth shut in the face of their ruthlessness, their corruption, and their violence. But Lot had a daughter. Her name was Plotit. She was not at all like her father. She saw every single person in the image of the divine, and she had a particular soft spot for poor people, people who were struggling. One day, she came across a poor man who was starving on the street, and her soul ached for him. She knew well the danger of showing compassion in a society like that, but she also understood that she had to do something to help. So she quietly conceived of a way that she could sneak food to the poor man each day when she went out to draw water, and she took great care not to be noticed. But over time, the people of Sodom, who took pleasure in watching this poor man suffer, started to grow suspicious. Surely he should have died from hunger already, they thought. How was he even surviving? It was then that they realized that someone must be helping him, a traitor who had broken the covenant of cruelty that bound the citizens of Sodom to one another. So they surveilled the man, and one day they witnessed Plotit bringing him bread. Since feeding the poor was an act of criminality warranting the death penalty, the people of Sodom prepared to burn the girl to death. I wish I could say that there was some heroic intercession here, divine or human, to save this gentle soul. But the story goes that Plotit was marched into the town square for a public execution, a warning to others who might be tempted to open their hearts to someone in need. Better to close your shutters than get involved in these uncomfortable matters. In the final moments before her execution, Plotit wailed. It was a terrible, anguished cry that echoed across the land, a cry so piercing that the Holy One could not ignore it. It was a cry that awakened God to the injustices that were being perpetrated in Sodom and Gomorrah and compelled God to take vast punitive action against the people there. It is said in our tradition that if we listen deeply, we can still hear the echoes of Plotit's cry to this day. This story, read through the rabbinic lens, is a warning to us. This is what happens when we fail to see the image of God in our neighbor, when we forget that we are our siblings' keepers. And it's no accident that the neighbor that Plotit sees, the object of the townspeople's derision, is a poor person. My friend in LA goes to a church of Caribbean immigrants in downtown. One day his pastor preached the following story. Say you're walking in downtown LA or Chicago or New York, and a man runs naked in front of you on the sidewalk. He's screaming and he's cursing. So what do? Most of us briskly cross the street. That guy's unwell, we think. But say you live in a tiny town, maybe a town of 50 households, and you're walking around one day when a naked man runs in front of you on the sidewalk, screaming and cursing. And because you live in a tiny town, you know this guy. It's Henry. Last week, you just happened to know there was a terrible tragedy. A fire burned Henry's house down, leaving him with nothing. What then do? Henry, you say, Come with me, my friend. You need a warm meal and a safe place to stay. The question is, what does it take to shift our collective consciousness from stranger who's unwell to Henry, my neighbor, my responsibility, created in God's own image? This is a spiritual muscle that we are called to develop. It is an act of cultural defiance to shift our view of one another from stranger to sibling, from other to fellow image of God, possessed of innate dignity, worthy of love in any and every way. Because for every single person, as my friend Denise would say, we have no idea who she is or who she might become. So now I want to circle back to Rav and Rabbi Bar Chana and the case of the broken wine barrel. Perhaps now we can understand why Rabbi Bar Chana is forced not to comply with the law, but to go well beyond the letter of the law when it comes to these laborers. What the legal system does not require of him, his very humanity does. If you saw your workers as human beings, Rav was saying, you would understand their vulnerability. This is not just about being fair. It's about being decent. There is no justice without love. This ethos derives directly from the Torah, where we're warned in the book of Deuteronomy not to abuse a needy or destitute laborer, whether an Israelite or a stranger. You must pay the wages due the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and depends on it, or else the worker's cry to God will be issued against you and you will be found guilty. Why does the Torah offer such strict guidelines regarding the payment of laborers? I want to bring us to the words of Abravanel, one of the great medieval commentators, who says that there are 3 layers of obligation here. The first reason that we treat the laborer with dignity is to express mercy toward another human being. The second is to see him as family. And the third is to build a just community. In other words, for our own humanity, for the other's humanity, and for the society that we together are building. They're not laborers, the tradition warns. They are people who labor, people created in God's own image, and they deserve to be treated as such no matter what the law requires. So I want to close with one last story, not about ancient rabbis and barrels of wine, but about a dear friend of mine. Hannah was a beloved community member of ours who was out with her dog in the park some years ago when she came across a young man in Los Angeles, homeless, resting on a bench. So she stopped to chat with him. His name was Ryan. She asked him if he was hungry. He said yes, so she asked if she could take him out to breakfast. By the end of the meal, Hannah insisted that Ryan come move into her home in her spare bedroom, where she had a safe place for him to rest and begin to heal. And Ryan did move in. He lived in Hannah's home for a full year until he was able to get back on his feet. I want to say that I was really worried about Hannah when I first heard that she invited Ryan into his home. All of her friends were. We didn't know him. We didn't trust him. He was clearly struggling. He was probably unwell. It was not inconceivable that he might, in a moment of desperation, harm our friend physically, emotionally, or materially. But Hannah understood something that we did not. She understood that her locus of moral concern extended to this guy on the bench. And that gesture of unrestrained love, while profoundly unsettling for many of us, was also genuinely admirable. For me, it surfaced some painful questions. What are the instincts that tell us that a homeless stranger is more dangerous to us than being without a home is to him? What risks am I willing to take to truly see another person as a person? What would I do? I imagine that most of us wouldn't have even seen Ryan lying there that day. Most of us are well trained in the kind of temporary moral detachment that allows good people to keep walking and get to work on time, despite the human suffering right in front of us. And those who would have stopped, I suspect, might have said hello and smiled, maybe given him something to eat or some cash, but not Hannah. Just over a year ago when Hannah died, Ryan eulogized her, saying, "That woman saved my life." I have to believe that in some way Hannah's embrace of this boy was because of her own forever broken heart after she lost her son Adam to mesothelioma, a cruel and aggressive cancer some years before. It's not only that she was a person who took all of her heartache and redoubled her commitment to pour love into the world, which she did. I've also always suspected that when she saw Ryan lying there on the bench that day, she thought, how can I not see you as my son? She treated him as though he, an image of God, was someone's child, and therefore her shared responsibility. She lived as though we really do all belong to one another. The challenge here is for us to imagine a fundamentally different kind of reality. A world in which we recognize and fight for each other's dignity. A world in which we, like Denise, see people not only as they are, but also as they could one day be. We, like Plotit, see the other as worthy of love, of grace, of goodness. We train our hearts to see even or especially the people that the rest of the world might render invisible. A world in which we recognize that we, images of the divine, are all bound up in life with one another, and our holiest work is not to look away. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Brous. I'm so excited that we are not finished with our time with her yet. Just such wonderful words of inspiration that will stick with us this week and in the coming year. So we are going to, let's give her another round of applause. So our time is not done yet. We're going to invite Rabbi Brett Kirshver to the stage to continue in conversation. We might take a few minutes out of our break just so we can have extra time with Rabbi Brous and Rabbi Brett. Rabbi Brett Kirshver has been an advisory board member for the past 7 years and is currently serving as a senior pastor at IHC. So thank you.
Hello.
Testing.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rabbi Brous.
Thank you.
I love the fact that your talk's so focused on narrative. So much of the Jewish tradition is about encapsulating the values that we hold dear through stories. And you've certainly given us many, many stories this morning to think about. What I find myself wondering, and I hope that this will address some of the questions that are in the crowd as well, is there's a distance that I'm feeling between this very idealized vision of the world as you present it, the world that we are striving for, and some of the challenges that we know as involved religious congregants and lay leaders and religious leaders. I thought we might start by trying to bridge that gap. You know, what is the work that we have in front of us today that can lead us towards that place where we might feel like if I see someone on the street who I recognize a little bit, that I might actually invite them into my home to live with me for a year. At worst, I guess it might feel naive, and as you put it, you had some concern for your friend that by opening herself up, opening her home in such a way, she's really also becoming very vulnerable, and there's a huge risk involved in the personal. So I guess my larger question to you is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we take our religious communities from where they are and help move in that direction? The first question, I guess, that I'd like to address to you, though, is about this word tzedek. So we know from Jewish tradition that the word tzedek, justice, it's central. It's the work that we do every day. How do you make the leap between this idea of tzedek, this idea of justice in an abstract way, and actually the tachlis, the on the ground work of economic equity, and why should I consider my justice work to be making sure that other people have jobs in the world?
Okay, so first, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Brett. I am not suggesting that every one of us goes out and invites homeless people to come live in our home like Hannah did. What I wanted to start with for this conversation is a foundational claim that every human being is created in the image of the Holy One. And we who hold that belief as sacred, as central to our faith, walk into the world, and it seems like the world makes a mockery of our most core faith commitment, right? Because we live in a world in which human beings are not treated as images of the divine in so many ways. And so the question is, do you abandon the dream and the commitment, the faith commitment, or do you abandon the world? And the answer is neither, right? We hold the dream and we hold the engagement with the world. As I said earlier, I quoted this verse, Sheshet yamim tavo v'asita kol melechtecha. For 6 days you should do all the work of the world. V'yom hashvi'i shavat l'Adonai Elohecha. But the seventh day is for God. And the way that I understand that dynamic is we invest and we engage in the world as it is, and then we remind ourselves of the world as it ought to be. And so we're in a constant dialogue between the reality and the dream, And again, I cite Rabbi Yitz Greenberg here, who says that this is the very power of the Sabbath, is that we live in the world as it is Sunday through Friday, and then when the sun sets, we enter a dreamscape where we live in a world in which millions of people aren't incarcerated, in which millions of people don't live on the street, in which there is no racism, there is no hatred, there is no violence. And when we reignite that dream week after week, it's what gives us the strength to go back out into the world and do the work. So what I'm starting with is a kind of foundational language, a foundational commitment, what fuels the work that we do. And all of us, especially from different faith traditions, will translate that in different ways. But the idea is the work that we're doing day after day moving us toward that vision of a world redeemed in which every human being is treated as God's own image? Or is it moving us further away from that? That's a core question that I think we have to ask with all of our efforts.
It seems like you're pointing us towards a tension, really, that if we are living religious lives, it's not enough just to focus on the ritual, but to never rest easy knowing that the ritual has been enough, but instead allowing the ritual to inform the way we engage in the world. I'm reminded of the text that is also from the Talmudic period. People are getting a look inside of the mind of the rabbis. We call on these texts from 2,000 years ago. I also learned this as a song at summer camp. We sing these things without really thinking about them. But I have noticed that this is a really challenging text. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It says it's not your responsibility to complete the task, but neither are you free to sit back and do nothing. And I think that addresses something that is probably the overwhelming feeling that we have in the modern world. I could take one person and I could give that person a job. And really, what difference is that going to make? I could, and I do actually, carry around dollar bills so that when people ask for help, I give them $1. But really, isn't that just making the problem worse? And what good am I really able to do? It feels like such a drop in the bucket. How do we explore that tension, knowing that that even if I do a little bit, it's really not making a big difference?
Well, I want to tell you that I've been thinking a lot the last few years about the wisdom of Dr. King, who brought us the fierce urgency of now, and also taught us that the arc of the moral universe is long, and it bends toward justice, but it's long, meaning it takes a long time to make movement. And I think in some ways, these very old faith traditions are incrementalist traditions. I mean, they've been around for thousands of years. We're in this endless journey to try and move the dial a little bit at a time, every generation a little bit further. along a little bit closer to a better world. And I think about what it means to hold both the awareness of the fierce urgency of now and the awareness that the world we dream of is not going to come in our lifetime. And what I've been struggling with, to just be honest with all of you, is that I don't think we have a long time at this point. I think that the reality of climate devastation and what we're seeing and experiencing, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, wildfires, means that our timeline has shrunk. And so the incrementalist approach of, it's not up to you to finish it, but you got to do your best, go out there, and each of us in our own way, we're going to do a little. I feel, on one hand, yes. On the other hand, like, that's not enough. And there's a part of me that my revolutionary spirit is saying the incrementalist approach has failed to get us where we need to go in this moment. And what we need is dramatic, systemic change in the immediate. I think the people who advocate for incrementalism, which is part of, is part of, certainly part of my tradition, part of our tradition, are often people in privilege and privilege and power. So it's a very gentle way to imagine social change, a little bit at a time, a little drop. There's a famous story about Rabbi Akiva from the Talmud where, Rabbi Akiva was one of the great sages, but he was 40 years old when he first started to study. And one day, the story goes, he was like out on a hike and in the forest, and he saw a large stone, and it had a hole right through the center of it, a tiny hole. And he thought, what tool in the ancient world is able to drill a hole like that? And he looked up and saw that from the mountain above, there was a drop of water that fell right into that spot. And he sat for hours and saw another drop and then another drop and realized that water is stronger than rock. And little by little, we can chip away and make change. And I'm so moved. That's such a beautiful image, right? And I also feel that our window is shrinking to make meaningful change, and that in some ways we don't have the luxury of an extended time frame here. And for people who are suffering in the immediate, whether from poverty or from systemic racism or any of the other injustices in our society, we don't have the luxury of waiting for generations to try to address this. And part of the power of connecting to a faith tradition, and I did not grow up religious. I grew up Jewish, but not particularly religious. And I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. That was my dreams. I was a 5-year-old who wanted to be a civil rights attorney. Like I used to tell that to my family at dinner. I'm going to be a civil rights attorney one day. But I realized at some point when I was in college that all of the great agents of social change who I admired the most were people of faith. And that just knocked me off my feet. I thought, what is it about their faith that roots their commitment for a world redeemed and gives it wings at the same time? And I realized that part of the power of these traditions, these sacred traditions that we hold, and these foundational theological commitments to imagining and then working toward a world redeemed, is that it's constantly nagging at us, constantly pushing us. We should not be able to rest. We can go to the most beautiful Shabbat services or Sunday church services or Friday at the mosque and feel our hearts are expanded and we feel spiritually nourished, but that's not enough. That's never been enough. And so part of the beauty of being in these traditions is we have these regular reminders that it's not enough and that we are called, I think each of us and all of us, to think about a more dramatic interventions in order to realize the world that we dream of.
Amen to that. I've had a few opportunities to hear you talk about this and to speak with you about this. There is one question that I have wanted to ask you for many years. Now I have my public opportunity to ask you. I did warn you I was going to ask you this. And I'm also realizing this is so cool. There are questions coming in, cool. So I should probably get to some of those as well, so in a few minutes that we have. But the question that I have to ask you, I remember coming out of seminary, and the first lesson I learned about synagogue life, it was compared to an aircraft carrier. And you've got a big boat with lots and lots of people on it, and it's steaming ahead in one direction. And I wish I could remember the exact number, maybe someone in the room does. In order to slow that boat down and to turn, to even just change direction a little bit. I think the number was 20 nautical miles and a half a day. That was my lesson in religious communities and how change might happen. So you have a very different narrative, and you shared a little bit of that history of Ikar. And I do feel like the benefit of being able to kind of start from scratch and say, this is how we're building an intentional religious community, and it's going to be based on these values, and this is what it's going to mean to join. I think that from the very beginning, in order to become a quote-unquote member, you not only made a financial commitment, but you also made a social justice commitment. And if I remember correctly, there were 4 different areas that you could do that. I showed this to my board, a number of whom are here, actually, and I'm happy that they're here. How do you take the lessons learned from that kind of, that way of thinking about Jewish community from scratch, and how do you apply that to organizations that are, Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation was founded in 1856. How do you help move that in a direction, especially considering the really urgent desire that many of us feel that window is now, and we don't know what tomorrow will bring?
It's interesting. I'm thinking as you ask this of an exercise that we did with our kids when my daughter was applying to high schools. We literally took out a whiteboard and we wrote down what all of our core values were, and then what all of the schools were that she could apply to. In LA, you have to apply to different, even public schools. It's a very weird system. There's a lottery, and you have to apply, and you have to work the system, and it obviously severely disadvantages people who don't have access to like all the secrets of how these systems work. And then so we whiteboarded our values here, and then all of our options up here. And it strikes me as a really important exercise for us to do with our churches and synagogues and mosques, to actually whiteboard our core values. Who are we? What do we believe in? What are we driven by? What's the world we want to live in? And then to cross-check that list with our budget. Where are we investing our money? Who are we hiring? How are we manifesting those values in the decisions that we're making in a very practical way? So it's true. We built Ikar. We started in the year 2004. We built Ikar because I felt that the world was on fire, and that we as a faith community were not doing enough to speak with real moral clarity about what our responsibilities were in a world on fire. And I also noticed that was one trend, that young people were fleeing the synagogue. I mean, I don't know if you have this issue in church, but actually I know you do, because the truth is this is not just the Jewish community. And what I started to learn, I was initially driven by my concerns about the Jewish community, but what I started to learn is that there's a lot of consistency when it comes to religious life in America, and especially as we entered the 21st century. There were a lot of studies that showed that young people are fleeing institutional religious life. And it occurred to me that perhaps the reason why so many young people were trying to escape institutional religious life was because they did not feel that in those institutions they were going to find others who were asking questions with the fierce urgency of now about how to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. And so to overplay Dr. King's famous lines. And so we started from scratch, and what that meant was that we had the freedom to establish the culture that we wanted, a culture of risk-taking, a truly values-driven and purpose-driven community. The downside was we couldn't afford to make photocopies, for our tech studies, and we were basically, week to week. My friend Greg from New York would send us $180. He's like, I heard what you're doing. Go, Sharon. And then I'm like, oh, we can turn the lights on this week. We have $180. I mean, so all the things that institutions have, we didn't have. But what we had was incredible mobility. And we were not a giant cruise liner. We were like a tiny little rowboat. And we could easily, or sailboat, and we could quickly navigate and move. And the challenge has been, as we grow, to hold that flexibility and fluidity, that culture of risk-taking, the notion of being values-driven, to never compromise our values, not for donors, for no one. We are driven by the sense that our tradition calls us to be voices of moral clarity, especially in times of crisis. And so that's what we're going to be. That's how we're going to drive the community forward always. How does that translate into communities that are legacy institutions? I believe that our people want and need moral leadership, and that while a lot of people say they want change and then they fire their rabbis and pastors as soon as they try to manifest change, I think that the challenge of leadership is to actually bring our people on board with the change that they actually need, even if they can't say it that they need it, or think that they don't want it in the moment. Because here's what we understand. You can ignore the climate realities. You can ignore the human bodies that are sleeping on the streets. You can ignore the polarization, the violent extremism. You can ignore the gun, but you can ignore everything that's happening all around us and live a very happy and comfortable life until it comes close to home. Or we can be honest about what the struggles are, and we can work rooted in our core values, which we've whiteboarded, to actually figure out how to steer the ship in a different direction. And I used to get in this argument with a dear friend of mine who's a very well-known, respected, beloved conservative rabbi of a big synagogue. And he used to say, well, you have, all the freedom because you can just go like this and I have to go like this, same idea. And I said to him, at some point, you have been in your congregation for 17 years. You stand up in front of your people and say, I have buried your loved ones. I have named your babies. I have stood with you under the wedding canopy. I'm asking you to join me at this protest for a living wage on Sunday because it matters to me that you are there, because this is a manifestation of our values. Or I have buried your loved ones. I have married you. I have named your babies. It matters to me that we try this new approach to spiritual life or to learning. It matters to me that we're part of this fight. And I think that our people they actually want that. They want that, even if they think they don't. Now, the joke about my parents, my beloved parents in Los Angeles, who moved to LA from the East Coast when we moved out there and joined our congregation, and the big joke was I didn't want them to join Ikar when they moved to LA. I wanted them to join the Reform Synagogue down the street because I know that part of the reason you join a synagogue is so you can complain about the rabbi. And I thought, I don't want that. I want you to have your synagogue that you hate and then complain about it to me, but not about me to other people. So I know that part of us, we're fueled by our discontent with our religious institutions and with our pastors and rabbis. But let us turn that discontent to systemic injustice. Let us turn that discontent to racism, to mass incarceration, to poverty, and together work to actually make effective change.
Okay, I do want to, noting that some of my board members are here, and I did just sign a new contract, so I should be okay for a couple more years. I took a note from an interview that you recently did, that there's a certain amount of creativity that is necessary as well. That some of the challenges that like as you call them, legacy institutions might face are that's their job to think about where's the money coming from, how do we honor 175 years of tradition. So at the same time that we're talking to them about, yes, please show up at this rally that I'm going to, or please write these letters, or please donate to this cause. That there's a certain amount of thinking outside the box that I think can be really inspirational. I was inspired by the story of the preschool that ICAR created, and I was wondering if you could quickly tell us a little bit about how that came to be.
We, in the early years of ICAR, and I guess, well, maybe we were about 10 years old when we started our preschool, and we realized the young families at ICAR really wanted a preschool. And we realized that in LA, a new preschool is a luxury and not a necessity. I wanted my kids to go to the ECAR preschool, but there are other preschools if we wanted to. And we were reading the book Half the Sky that Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wooden, I think, is that right? Wrote about the developing world, in which they make the argument that there is a direct correlation between literacy and survival in the developing world, especially for girls. Girls who know how to read are more likely to survive than girls who don't know how to read, who are more likely to be exploited, and you know, all kinds of terrible things happen to these children. And so basically what we realized is that a preschool in LA is a luxury, a school in the developing world is a necessity. We were not going to build our school in Los Angeles unless we also built a partner school somewhere in the developing world. We started to dive into some pretty rigorous research to figure out where. And it turns out that the need is just so massive. There are millions and millions of communities that actually need this support. We ended up partnering with an organization that connected us to, it's called Innovation Africa. And they actually bring Israeli solar and wind technology into communities in the developing world. And what we found once we partnered with them is that we were really excited to build a preschool, and they to build a school. Like, we wanted brick and mortar, and they said, that's great, but that's not what we want. We want lights in this. We have one communal building. We don't need a new building. We need lights in this building. We're like, we felt a little deflated. That's not so sexy. We want to build a school. And we realized that that's what the people needed. And so we ended up supporting electricity in this community. And once the lights were on, once they put in the solar panels in the schoolhouse, they were able to also create a medical center. They were able to light the homes. Then they wanted to build a secondary school. So a few years later, we were able to actually build a schoolhouse. And we've maintained a commitment to this community. We said, this is long-term. We're not going to drop in, drop out. But we want, this is a poverty mitigation effort. This is a life-saving effort. And it's a way for us to also we're in the communities in Katira, Uganda. It's so far outside of our, immediate world, and there's a tremendous amount of need. I live in Los Angeles. Like, I don't know if you've been to Los Angeles lately, but there are tent cities on every corner. It is so painful. We have a massive housing crisis. Housing is so expensive. It's such a complicated bureaucracy. It's so hard to address. Our community's building a home for ICAR. Now we're almost 20 years old, and we purchased a property, and we're building a home, and we're going to put 55 units of permanent supportive housing on our property, because we just feel like we have to address this in some way, in some small way. What we need is 55,000 units of permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles. It's a really terrible crisis. But even given how much need there is in the immediate, we really made the decision to go somewhere, Dafka, like precisely somewhere far away, to also constantly remind us that our world is a big world, and that our concerns are not only particular but actually are global, and that we're really responsible to each other. So we also act locally, and we also try to act globally.
That's wonderful. It seems to me that it's most religious institutions think about it the other way, that we have a school. Hey, wouldn't it be lovely if we partnered with another school? And so then you go out and find the school, whether it's in Israel or you find a school in Uganda or Afghanistan, wherever, and then you make the connection afterwards. But to build it intentionally from the beginning feels like a really a revolutionary act. So that's wonderful. Thank you for that example. I do only have a few minutes, but I want to summarize a couple of the questions that came in. This is my favorite. A couple folks asked, how do we persuade our lawmakers to use religious values in their decision making? And a couple of other people asked, how do we persuade lawmakers to stop using their religious values in decision making?
Yes. So, that's exactly what I was thinking when you read the first question. Look, I have one bar, which is this policy going to enhance human dignity or diminish human dignity? Is this going to expand people's rights and their humanity, or is it going to restrict their rights and their humanity? I see that somebody else asked about these laws. Indiana's in the midst of passing laws against trans youth and adults. And I know this is happening not only in Indiana, it's happening in Florida, it's happening in Tennessee, it's happening in Missouri, it's happening all over the country right now. And I know that many of the people who put forward those policies claim that they're acting out of their own religious commitments, right? And so I think the people who asked your second question I am guessing, are driven by concerns about that. Your religious commitment tells you that trans people should be invisible in our society, and therefore you're passing laws that are going to affect my child or my neighbor or my friend. And so you put your religious thinking away and instead focus on the greater good. I really do understand the concern about lawmakers who at least say that they're driven by their religious commitments, especially in this country, especially in this time. Maybe, can I say, especially in this state? I think, right? So I would say the question is, if the reason I started today with the first thing that we learned about human beings in the book of Genesis being that all human beings are created in God's own image, that all of us are images of the Holy One. If we take that as a foundational premise, then we ask, do these laws help us honor the dignity of every human being, or do these attack the dignity of already the most vulnerable human beings in our society? And it's very clear what these anti-trans pieces of legislation are doing. They are targeting in a way that we know is inciting violence. They are targeting already the most vulnerable people in our society. Trans youth have the highest likelihood of suicidality than among all youth and teens in this country. This is a moment in which I believe people of faith who are trying to work to pass these laws need to be asked, do you fundamentally believe that the human beings that these laws will impact are created in God's own image? And is your law going to protect them or going to target them and endanger them? That's the foundational problem.
Thank you for that. Yes, there's so many more questions that I'd like to ask you. I know that we all would. Our time is up now, though. I have found you to be an inspiration in your public work, in your congregational work. ecar-la.org.
Just ecar.org now.
Oh, it's a new? Oh,
ecar.org.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of teaching online. There's a lot of sermons online.
I have to say, I have a book that's coming out in January where I'm talking about a lot of these issues. So it's not up yet for pre-order, but it will be soon. It's called The Amen Effect, or The Amen Effect, depending how you say it.
It's really an inspiration. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time today and for the kickoff of this wonderful conference.
Thank you all.
And thank you all very much.
It's lovely to be with you.
So glad to have everyone back. Hope you got a chance to use the restroom or grab a drink. We're so excited for this next panel and get to hear from my friends and guests from Elevate and Providence Cristo. Moderating the panel will be Sarah Van Slambrook, and she has served on the Faith in Action Advisory Board, and she has a lot of experience in the nonprofit sector, community engagement, fundraising, evaluation, and she's just a good friend of mine too. So we're happy to have her here today. So thanks for being with us, Sarah. I do want to remind you that on the program, there is a QR code that connects you to speaker bios. So it would be great if you want to, check out our panelists and their backgrounds. But without further ado, I want to introduce Tevon Chow. You want to raise your hand, just you can say hi. Aaron Story, Adam Johnson, and they're all from Elevate. And then we have Fred Yakey and Jimmy Darbano from Providence Cristo Ray. We're so excited to have you here this morning.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to invite our panelists to grab a mic, and we'll just do some passing around. There we go. Terrific. Well, this panel session, we are focusing on youth. and are so excited to have some young people here so we can hear from your voices directly. And want to be talking about, as we get at what we heard this morning about work being holy, and what we are all called to do and to support, then how can we in this room learn from each other about how to walk alongside youth as they explore and work toward having that work that is life-giving, that is life-supporting for themselves as individuals, and as they grow older to support families and their lifestyle. So this panel here is going to speak to that. Learn a lot alongside all of you, and you have the opportunity to pose questions. We will save some time at the end. Remember, the questions are going to be on the screen, and so please do that through the QR code as we go along. So I'm going to get started by, Fred, I'm going to start with you. If you can maybe just tell us, I know that you have been working in this space for more than 15 years around community building, around education. Tell us a little bit about Providence Cristo Rey and the approach that you take with young people, particularly as it comes to work and work exposure.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me here as well. A little bit about Providence Cristo Rey High School. It is a uniquely modeled private school, high school only. Originally founded in Chicago in 1995 by a Jesuit priest who came back to America from doing foreign ministry work in South America. And the school was designed for one purpose and one point only, that was to eradicate poverty. So in other words, if you can afford the tuition, we typically do not allow you to come to our schools, right? There might be a thing like equity issues as to why, but so he founded the school on the south side of Chicago in the Pilsen neighborhood and had no issue enrolling people. The only challenge was when it came time to pay, the families couldn't afford it. So like most smart people, Father Foley says that he hired a consultant, and that consultant and him came up with a unique idea in '95 to have these students work in corporate America by looking at the downtown skyline. So wouldn't it be an idea to have these students who are coming from these hoods, these neighborhoods, where many of the corporate people are taking advantage of and having money, they actually work there. And two things that happen, they'll be exposed to multiple pathways to break cycle, but then these corporate spaces and these apartments and these corporations can actually now hire some of these students in, right? Wouldn't it be a grand idea to not hire diversity, but grow it, right? So the idea happened and something happened, it just blew up, right? They wanted more and more students, and since then, the school has been replicated with that same model around 39 places around America. We've been in Indiana. Providence Cristo Rey has been in Indiana since 2007 with the same model. And I think our school does things uniquely different because our focus is very clear, right? We don't have a certain area of town that we focus on. The towns and the areas of towns that we focus on are zip codes and what did the data say that these zip codes have. So most private schools don't have transportation. You got to come to the school if you want it. Well, in Indianapolis, our market is a little different. So you have markets like Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Chicago, and their public transportation is remarkably better. Where here in Indianapolis, we have a thing called redlining that has literally stopped success, literally stopped people from getting out of the poverty. So Cristo Rey has to have their own buses or else we wouldn't do it. So we bring our school to the communities, and we pick our kids up and we take them to the school. So my role specifically as vice president is that I oversee our unique corporate partnerships, which means corporate partners sign up to our school to give a difference and to make sure the students can work their job. Because without students working, they can't afford tuition. So it's a work and earn model. One day a week, our students work in corporate places. Our partners are Eli Lilly. We have law firms all over the city, basically, our students work at. And then in exchange, these corporations pay about $7,000 a year. So from Labor Day to Memorial Day, students are working. They go to school 4 days a week, and one day they're out there. And that's transformational because for many students, we think that education, unfortunately, America has taught us that education, if you get an education, then you have a better outcome in life, but that's not reality. There are many educated people that are being overpassed for jobs every day. In fact, many people coming out of poverty, the more education you get, the deeper in poverty you go. right? If you get an educational degree, you go to some of these institutions, you graduate with over 6 figures of debt. And if you're already coming into debt, that's not really working. I think Cristo Rey has figured out something that most education institutions haven't, that we understand that there's really 3 ways you get out of poverty. Number 1 is relationships. Many people in poverty don't have access to relationships or do not have access to jobs. So the only access that maybe a way out of the hood is probably somebody that you may have to have a job, right? That's kinship. Maybe you have a family member that is working at years ago Chrysler and they can put you on, but those jobs don't exist anymore. And then the third way you make it out of is politics. We have to teach our students that politics is real, it exists, and this is how you maneuver it. So what Cristo Rey does is simple. We just expose them to 2 different things. Everybody in our school comes from neighborhoods where you know who the drug dealer is, right? I just tell them, I want to show you a legal drug dealer, Eli Lilly, and then you can compare the difference.
Thanks, Fred. You talked about relationships being key. How do you weave that in to the work that you do with your students as they're mentoring that happens? How do you make those connections and help support them to make those connections?
Yeah, I think relationships is a word that's often misused. I think relationships sometimes are just because people think if you make them laugh or you know their name. But relationships are interesting, right? Because you can know someone. And you're like, yeah, I know that person, but if they don't like you, okay, you know them and they're not going to take care of you, right? You just name drop and they don't think about it. But relationships and how we use it and how I understand it's really about proximity, right? Proximity means how close are you to me, to knowing who I am authentically, knowing what my deficiencies are, and not only that, what are you doing to help me? And every relationships move at a speed of trust, right? So do I trust you enough to be vulnerable, to show who I am? And when you learn about me, will you expose me or will you help me? So I think what Cristo Rey has is a unique microcosm of what can heal our community. We have Catholics working together with Protestants. We have corporate America working together with urban education. And when we come together, we can convene at a place where it's safe and everyone can make success happen. So relationships are being exposed by the authenticity of truth, by looking at what we're doing wrong and how can we answer these questions. So when I recruit people to be on my board, these C-level executives, I simply say, if you don't do something now that can fix your pipeline, you're waiting too late. Don't wait until high school. Don't wait into college. You start in high school. And I have students who were exposed at Eli Lilly. A single woman came here with her daughter, and she got exposed to Eli Lilly. John Lechleiter, personally mentor, he was the president of Lilly, and he put her in a chemistry lab as a sophomore. Took a risk on her. She graduated, and now she's a chemist at Eli Lilly. And if we have people who can share their privilege with others by sharing their resources, that's what relationship really is.
Thanks, Fred. So, Jimmy, you had the pleasure of being at Providence Cristo Rey and graduating. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? How did this play out for you? What did relationships look like? What did work look like while you were there? And what has it meant for you now? I think everyone would like to hear a little bit more just about your story.
So I went to Providence all 4 years. 2016 is when I started. I graduated 2020. I'm now a junior at Indiana University, Bloomington. Providence was definitely something different to adapt to. I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis, so I went to public school a lot, and just coming to high school is a different step. High school, I went from having 3 teachers every day to, at Providence, is 7 teachers on top of, 9 periods. We go to school from, 7:51 to 4:30. I don't know if it's changed now, but when I went, it's a long day, and I tell people all the time, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to get used to working long days, and that's, Providence kind of, it teaches you that at a young age, so once you get older, it gets easier for you. At school now, I'm a basketball manager for the team, and I also work another job, so I'm just used to working these long days. It doesn't even seem like they're long anymore. It's just a part of my routine. The work study was a good experience. Without the work study, I don't even know if I'm at this conference speaking right now. Just learning things like how to dress, how to talk to people, eye contact, everything. I worked at ADT my freshman, sophomore, junior year. My senior year, I worked at St. Vincent Hospital. And to touch upon the relationship thing, that's a big thing. Without relationships, I mean, you really don't have anything. Attitude is the biggest thing. I always try to be humble, smile, just treat everybody like with some respect. So that goes a long way.
Thanks, Jimmy. Long hours, long work. Translating that from what it means to be in high school, to being in college, to being successful in life. I mean, those are things that I heard threads of with Fred, but you really made come to life. Appreciate you sharing that part of your story, and congratulations on being in your junior year. Now you're at the point of like looking at what comes next after college, and that's tremendous. So congratulations on that. Absolutely. Turning, Adam, to you, can you tell us a little bit about Elevate Indianapolis, just to kind of give us a little bit of context? And what do you see as key items that youth need in order to be set up for success?
So Elevate Indianapolis is a part of a larger organization, nonprofit organization based out of Denver, Colorado, that's existed for about 40 years. We have affiliates, so Elevate Indy is one affiliate, and we have about 20 affiliates throughout the country. Kansas City, Atlanta, New England states, New York, Boston, St. Louis, all around the country. What we're a program inside of a school, so typically looking at inner city schools. So right now we have programs at Arsenal Tech High School, George Washington High School, and Purdue Poly High School. So our program focuses on teaching leadership skills, coping skills, things that we feel are necessary for a student to be successful in post-secondary life. So we both teach inside the school, so we have 4 pillars to our program. So we have the in-school piece where we're teaching these programs actually in a classroom. They take our class as an elective, so they receive credit towards their graduation requirements. Mm-hmm. But then we also have a sports and adventure component to our program. We have a college and career, Pathways to Purpose college and career component, and then we have our mentoring component. So we use the in-school piece to make the connection with the students. And then with that connection, we get them engaged in opportunities outside of the classroom, after school, to give them access and exposure, which we feel is equally huge as well. Access and exposure to different opportunities, whether it's a vision trip, visiting a company, like Purposeful Design is here, Dave Palmer. We visited his company on many occasions, Armco Electrical, iron workers, eye doctors, you name it, we visited to give the students opportunity to see what types of careers and opportunities lie within those organizations. We also visited colleges throughout the state, whether it's Marion, St. Joe's, IUPUI, IU, Purdue. Don't be mad. Sorry. I do have IU socks on, so I'm representing Tobias IU socks. So to give them exposure to that as well. But then also we have a focus, because not every student is going to go to college. Some are going to go straight into the workforce. Some are going to go to the armed services. So we also give, some want to be entrepreneurs. So we give them exposure to what that may look like for them. So in a nutshell, that's what our organization is and does. Concerning success for the young people that are in our program, so we're talking high school students, but we also create a pipeline where we do teaching, our high schoolers teach down into the middle and elementary schools as well through our program. But what I think, for me, what's necessary for success for the students in our program is that very thing, the access. You know, it's one thing to do a vision trip to an organization so that they can see what the job entails and what it's like and what opportunities. Many times we'll take a student to an organization and they'll say, oh, I thought this was just a tech company, you know, so like Black Ink, but well, they also have an accounting company. They also have a department. They also have someone who's doing advertising. They also have these other areas and fields within their organization that they're not aware of fully. So access is one thing, but what we truly feel would be is needed and would allow for true success for our students are opportunities beyond just visiting, but job shadowing. So job shadowing, apprenticeships, internships, those are the opportunities that our students need. I think every young person needs to really get a better grasp on what it's like to operate and to work, to thrive in a field that they believe they may be interested in, because until they have the exposure to it, they may not know. I can guarantee you virtually everyone in here probably, if you went to school, you went with one degree in mind and you ended up switching your sophomore year or your junior year or even your senior year. So how much more are young people when we're forcing them into a certain lane or ideology or whatever the case may be, and we're not allowing them to have exposure to other opportunities that may truly pique their interest and they may truly thrive in and be successful in eventually.
One of the things that I heard you talk about was exposure in lots of different ways. Can you maybe give an example of what that exposure has translated into through maybe one student, and we'll hear from a student in just a moment, but from kind of all the different places along the way, the exposures that they've had, and how that connects together into a story.
Right. So we have a young man that's an alumni now. So we work with alumni or alumni students as well. Elijah, who, while with our program, we did a partnership with Young and Larimore. So that was an opportunity for him to. He has a artsy background, wants to do something in that arena. He's an alumni now, and so Frontrunner Production. Out on the east side with Warren High School, offered an opportunity in our connection, because we have about 30 community partners, and what we try to do is really narrow down who's really going to give the students opportunities. Once again, so just not a trip to your organization, not just a photo op, but a true opportunity to get their hands wet, feet wet, to see what this is like. So Mary Rigg paid for this young man to do an apprenticeship with Frontrunner Production in actually doing the type of work that he's interested in. And so not just doing something, creating a piece of art, but more so, well, what does it look like to do digital art? What does it look like to do some type of digital production for a company, an advertising company or something of that sort? And so now he's been doing that. I think he's had 2 stints of that and just getting more experience in that type of work that he's truly interested in. So looking for opportunities like that is important. We have another, through that same organization, but also partner with another partner, we had individuals that were doing television production as well. Matter of fact, was at Warren, and a young lady of ours was able to sit in the boombox doing Warren Central football games. So she was doing the graphics in the boom truck for Warren Central football games. We also have an opportunity, so I'm thinking just because Frontrunner's really been huge just recently stepping up and providing opportunities. So right now we have the opportunity to go to have our students in the boom truck for Indiana Pacer home games as well. So those are the type of opportunities that we're consistently looking for our students to really get a feel and get some experience, something that they can put on a resume, something that when they see when an organization company sees it, it'll hold some weight, and not just a photo op. Once again, for our students.
Terrific. It comes to life for me as you talk about that it's not just one placement or one organization or one handshake, right? It goes deeper than that, but it's also more than one organization. You're connecting them to multiple people, multiple relationships, going back to that. In order to thread that needle and keep it going. So Tavon, we'd love to turn to you at this point. You have been engaged with Elevate Indianapolis. What's been most impactful for you, and how has it changed what you're thinking about for what comes next for you?
Well, the biggest thing for me that I got through Elevate was the relationships. Like, we've built relationships, bonds throughout all 3 years that I've been with Elevate. It's not just like they're just getting us in here and getting us out. They're actually trying to help us expand our palettes and what they're helping us find and guide our way through life. It's because throughout Elevate, after we get out of high school, we are still with Elevate, even throughout high school. So I can always call on them when I need them. And then with the exposure, they expose us to so many new opportunities that open so many doors for many people like me, who have been, through rough backgrounds, who didn't have, dreams to shoot as high as we could have been shooting. But through Elevate, that helped me realize I could have been, or I could shoot higher. I could be more than what I thought I could have been. And the biggest part was just the relationships throughout Elevate, the exposure.
What sort of things have you gotten to do with Elevate, and maybe what has that led you into thinking about doing something particular like that? Or maybe it's, you got to do something, you're like, boy, I really don't want to do that next. Sometimes that's just as good a learning opportunity.
Well, Elevate has really helped me realize, like I said, a lot. And they definitely helped me realize what I did and did not want to do through the guidance. And they put me through things like life mapping, where we start at a really young age, where we're young and we're not really thinking about what's really next. We just want to live. But they've made us realize that it's really important to know our next step and what's to do next, really. So I'm really grateful towards Elevate. I'm glad they put me in the program, and I'm proud to say I'm a member of Elevate.
That's awesome. Thanks, Javon. For Jimmy and Tavon, as kind of a follow-up, what sort of barriers did you face that being a part of these programs helped you connect to? Just to better understand, for those people in our audience here who are wanting to maybe start working with youth or have been working with youth but want to understand better, what are barriers that get in the way that you need help with, or you needed help with and you were able to get help with?
I would say for me, well, my mom did a good job raising me, keeping me away from a lot of things. And I will say something. Thank you. I will say something that I just realized as I got older. It's just the first to do a lot of things. That's always kind of hard. So, for example, I'm the first person out of my immediate family to go to a 4-year institution, and just to be down in college by myself, having my own apartment, just learning how to navigate different bills and priorities, that's always hard. And I try not to make excuses, and I just I try to make the most of the cards that I'm dealt with. So that's just been the biggest thing for me.
Thanks, Jim.
I'd say one of the biggest barriers for me was myself, my own mindset going into it. My background wasn't the greatest, but, same with my mother. She always made it happen, no matter how little we had. She did what was best for us. And then, so since then, she's been with me throughout my whole life. So my biggest supporter, she guided me throughout step through step,
Absolutely.
Yeah, she helped me realize what more I could have for myself, other than she always strives for me to become better than what I am today and what I am the next day. I have no words to express how grateful I am to her.
That's tremendous. For both of your mothers and for mothers that are in this crowd, I mean, the support of loving moms and of caregivers, if that's your auntie or whoever that might be in your life, boy, for young people is really, really extremely important. So appreciate both of you lifting that up. Circling back, as we think about some of the things that we've heard today, looking to Fred and Adam and Aaron, as you hear these barriers and you think about the barriers that you see, what are the different aspects of what you're doing in your day-to-day, and be thinking about this answer from, again, thinking about our audience. What can we all be doing in our work with young people to help surpass these barriers? What are things that we need to be thinking about? What are your learnings around helping them in surpassing these things that they're encountering?
I think that's a great question. I've been blessed to know Aaron and the work that he's doing that is thankless. And one of the things that I realize is to the audience, for those who care, is that there's a difference between being mentors and being a sponsor. And we don't need as many mentors as we do as sponsors, and let me define what that is. Mentor is someone who says, hey, I have something to give, I'm gonna take time with you, I'm gonna come, I'm gonna have an extra tie, I'm gonna have some shoes, I got a suit, and that's needed. It's needed. And you mentor them, you're there with them along the way. But when it comes time for these students that really need help, who don't have access, mentors typically don't go that extra mile because there's a lane that ends when it deals with putting my name on the line. A sponsor is someone who says, listen, I'll give you all the things that you don't have, but I'll go an extra step. I have capital. I have a good credit. I have a good name. I serve on a board, and there's going to be an opportunity to come up, and I want to make sure that you apply, and I'm going to put your name next to mine, and I'm going to make sure that we break a cycle. I need more sponsors who are not afraid of ruining their name for the help of someone else who doesn't have a name. And the more people that I come in contact with, and I'm sure they'll say the same thing, it's powerful when you have something of value, that it costs you something, and you know it's expensive, but when you are a sponsor, you give that away for free, because you know it's going to come back to you in other ways. And that's my cry out, because oftentimes we look at the youth and we have so much negativity, and I really think sponsors are really what help shape and change lives.
Thank you.
Thinking about, I believe, Rabbi Brous, something she said when looking at young men like this, I think one of the biggest barriers is when we see young men like this, we don't see them oftentimes as being equals. We don't show them the dignity that we would show our own kids or loved ones. We don't give and extend that same opportunity to them. So if we can, as a collective, begin to view our young people, regardless of race, ethnicity, background, pronouns, if we can begin to view them as one who could benefit from the resources, to what you're saying as well, those resources, without any strings attached. And it's not just a photo op. We're just not meeting a metric, a number of the data, but we're actually trying to give selflessly of ourselves to those that may be underserved, under-resourced, and the like. Then I think we can begin to move the needle. But with that, one of the biggest barriers I see in general for those that are able is the need for transportation. That is a constant barrier we come across and face when trying to get these young people to these opportunities. Many of the opportunities, frankly, that we come across may reside in Carmel, or in Zionsville, or near its Plainfield. Many of the opportunities aren't here in the city, but even if they are at Lilly, I still need to get that young man or young lady from 42nd and Post to Lilly. And they're expecting them to be there 8 a.m., 7 a.m. Well, that means they're waking up 4:35 a.m. to get on the bus, connect downtown or wherever to get there. And so transportation on a very practical sense is one of the biggest barriers we face in the work that we do.
So we have a lot of individuals here from different congregations across our community. Some of them have been doing work alongside young people for a long time. Some of them may be interested in taking up something new after being inspired here today. What advice do you have for those people in our community that want to come alongside? And that can be for our young people. It can be for Fred, Adam, whoever would like to. But in terms of, we were just talking about barriers, but I think more, how do we come alongside as people? So maybe it's helping your organization, so you could take it from that side. What does your organization need in terms of help from our community? Or as a congregation, if they are trying to directly walk alongside youth, what advice do you have?
Yeah, I think our city can do better than what we have been. And so last night we all saw the news of a shooting outside of a school. Involved a couple, it was separate from the game, but there was a game being played, and one of our Elevate staff was in the gym the whole couple hours with the team of the school. So we're texting, he calls me afterwards, 10:15, and we're talking through it. He's there today. A couple of our staff are there today. And this news didn't name the person who was shot and killed. 5 minutes before this little panel session started, I get a call, and it was a friend saying, hey, they named the guy that was killed, and I don't want to say his name now, but it was one of your guys, who I'm a basketball coach in my non-9-to-5 time, And he played for me for a couple years ago, Riverside kid, dropped out of Met, in the area, probably 20, 21 now. And I was just going through my texts as Fred was talking about relationship and sponsorship. It was like one of my last texts with him from a year and a half ago was he'd been shot. And I was like, let's get back in school and let's finish out. And he's been in my home, stayed in my house, traveled over states with time together. And so I think about the context often that our city lives in, and I was thinking about this quote from C.S. Lewis that before I got this call. He says, theologian C.S. Lewis, is what you see and what you hear depends a great deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. And I think too much of the resources and too much of the shaping perspectives that happen are, you can only grow so much sitting in this room, in this location here. And too much of the decisions where resources are allocated and spent in time is spent in areas where they're really not the roots of the actual challenges themselves. And so I just think, I heard this however many years ago, and it's not totally appropriate, but I'm going to share it anyway, but it's, the romance without finance is a nuisance. And I just, I think about how to help, your congregation. I in a prior life, I have a master's degree in biblical studies, pastored church for a while, and that's rooted in the neighborhood. And I think there is this piece of people of faith, whatever, I'm kind of a gospel-driven kind of a guy, so that's my persuasion, and all of us here are different angles, but it's going to have to intersect with your life in very, just how does this impact you today? And it's probably going to hit the time, treasure, talents today. And I love the idea of sponsorship. We use mentorship. It means very deep levels, to us than occasional intersection with kind of jump in, blow in, blow out. It means really presence. And so I do think about that as churches, as people of faith. If your gospel's not preaching to you daily and how you're living the incarnational presence, whether that's the gospel, whether that's whatever your tradition is, I think you've got a hole in your gospel. Mm-hmm. And whether that's corporate presence is as Fred and I met him years ago, I thought, man, that's okay, they got some things going, they're pretty good, and I need to keep listening and learning from Fred and the work at Providence. But ultimately, bloom where you're planted. Where are you at? If you own a business, do equity work in your business. If you're at a school, if you're an educator, do that. see who's in front of you fully. Be with who's in front of you fully. If you're a nonprofit person, figure out how to reform this mess of nonprofit world in our city that's ultra competitive, non-collaborative enough, and woefully underfunded still. And I think just wherever you're at, just bloom there for, this is like, we love Tay, obviously, and he's one of our kids, but we talked when Lindsay would say, hey, do you have a student that wants to be president? I was like, yeah, we got a lot of them that would be like, so if he's not in front of you, who is in front of you? And as a church, if you've got to be firmly rooted in the reality of our city, and if that's knowing the history, to Fred pointed out earlier, of the red line in our city, but that may be history, but there's present realities right now that I'm not a politic guy. I don't really care to spend time around that's not my lane. I want to spend time in the neighborhoods with kids, and I spend a lot of time in my 9 to 5 as being the president and CEO of Elevate. But ultimately, I want to know that our work is making a meaningful impact, so Tay has real opportunities and real exposure and not just playing a game to check boxes, to report outcomes, to fill a grant report. We want real impact, or it's just a real waste of time, quite frankly. And that's where my 2 cents is. So, but these guys are awesome, so the rest of them, they should have the rest of the time. So you've got to.
I think what Aaron said is kind of hit the head on the nail. What would be my plea? What would be my cry to all these outstanding individuals here? The vision that I'm from Indianapolis, so it's personal for me. I'm born and raised. I went to the best high school, okay, on this side of the White River, okay? Went to the Arlington High School. Come on, where we at? Make some noise. Let's go, East Side, okay? See you up there, Pastor Sullivan. So growing up in Indianapolis and seeing the transformation of what happened to our city so quickly. When I was in school, we had actual inner city schools that had competing sports. It was community. We had principals that stayed there for decades. And when I went to college, went to HBCU, and I came back home to serve, it's a weird thing about God, right? When you start to ask him, is what I want what you want? He will hurt your feelings, okay? You could not have told me I would not have been the first black mayor of Indianapolis. I was going to be that. And I asked God, what do you want me to do? He told me to go back home and become an after-school director. And turned down a job and started to serve on 23rd and Park, what is now Oaks Academy. And that led me to want to be an educator because there wasn't anyone who looked like me that was telling people who look like me that they can be me.
Amen.
So I went back to school. That rhymed. I'm going to tweet that.
Yeah.
Okay? Didn't expect to clap. And then that led me to serve. And I'm getting to somewhere. And that led me to serve. And then I had a chance to go back to my alma mater and to be a teacher. And I was so excited. And when I went back to Arlington in 2010, it brought tears to my eyes because what I was proud about was now an absolute shamble. And I asked the Lord, what do I do? I'm a Christian, born and raised in church. My mother's a pastor, I'm a youth leader. And God told me to use what's in your hand. And when I went to college, I didn't have money. So like most people, I created a hustle. And I convinced my friend that I could cut hair. I couldn't cut hair, but I can talk about cutting hair. I had to look, the barber's got the swag. And I cut his hair, and I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do. I took his hairline back. It's true. But when I gave him the mirror, he said, man, I thought you can cut hair. I said, well, I thought I could, but he said, but it's not that bad. And from then, a barber was born. I became the campus barber because I realized I wasn't afraid to fail. And I guess my plea for you all is that I became an educator not because I wanted to be, but the Bible says as they went, they were healed. I just went because God told me to. And you have to do something. Don't wait for the perfect opportunity when you get right. Use what's in your hand. I started cutting hair. I started to mentor young people. Then I became a principal. Then I became the first black president of a Catholic school in Indiana, and I'm not Catholic. I just started doing things, and things opened up, and we need more doers. We need more doers.
Amen.
Just do it, right? And what happens when you do things, we can spark a revival. Like a revival is when things are dead and they brought back. It's not just a feeling, but these things that are dying in our community, we all see them. We all know what we have to do, but we don't have enough people who just do something. And what happens when you just do something, other people want to feel good and they do it with you. And then there's a scripture that says 1 can chase 1,000, 2 can put 10,000 to flight. And when you start to bring unity, then you start to have revival, then you have community back. And that's my plea. Let's just do something.
Thank you, Fred.
Let's go. I told
That's
you.
right.
You're taking over the world. That's it.
So we're left here, in the audience with a real call to action of we need to be doing something. And I heard here from Aaron about do that where you are, right? It's not about going out and becoming something different or going somewhere else, unless God tells you that's where you're going to go, and then you got to go. But that if you are in corporate, then do something there around equity. Get engaged, be a connection, be a sponsor. If it's about, if you're working in nonprofits, then let's figure this mess out. If you are in your church or your synagogue, then what are you doing? Who are you doing it with? How can you do it differently? How can you connect with some of these folks on the stage? One of the things that I heard loud and clear was proximity. And I heard those words spoken here, but I also felt that. I hope you also felt that from our young people here, but also from Aaron's story. And I want to say to you, Aaron, I appreciate the vulnerability that you shared with us by calling out that young person that you knew personally. And may we all embrace him as Henry, as our initial speaker here spoke, that to not turn that blind eye, but to know that he was a person made in the image of God that we lost as a community here. And I'm so sorry for that. So with that, I think we need to close out on this revival note of do something and be where you are and be who you are. And I will turn it back to Lindsay to go ahead and lift up for Mike to be able to share some thoughts with us.
I just want to give just one more round of applause and show our gratitude to Jimmy and Tay for really their courage and their openness to be here. And I always think, you guys have been blessed by the wonderful mentors that you've had, and I encourage you to continue just to pay it forward. And I know you will, and just by example. And I thank the rest of you for your leadership and for being here with us, and really for encouraging us to be doers and to really show up in a meaningful way. So we have lots of Faith in Action grant recipients that are doing just that. And so I want to make sure you guys know to take the opportunity at 3 to meet and engage with them. But I also want to introduce you to Mike Smith, who has been a founder of the Faith in Action Project. One thing, the notion that we had when we started this project, that there's a lot of fantastic work going on in Indianapolis, but it's happening in silos. And how can we lift up these great efforts and see them replicated, and also really encourage and incentivize collaboration? So I want to just open the floor to Mike Smith, and please give him a warm welcome.
I am what stands between you and lunch, so I will do this quickly and hopefully in a way that will make sense in light of what's happened this morning. 7 years ago, David Malot's predecessor, Matt Bolton, and Don Kniebel and I met to address a wound in my heart. I had had a personal experience, unlike others I'd had in my life. I stopped at a red light on the way downtown at 27th and Capitol in front of a school that had been closed. And a friend and I had sponsored that school. And it broke my heart to realize that once again that neighborhood was going to experience failure. And the thought of failure in that neighborhood just was devastating to me. And it occurred to me that the school was closed not because the teachers failed, or not because of any lack of resource. It was because of the chaos that preceded the attendance of those children in our school. They came to our school wounded, broken. And in my heart, that was no longer acceptable. So we three of us embraced the notion we would seek people to serve on our advisory committee, some who you've met already today, who could grow comfortable with the notion that it was no longer acceptable to drive by poverty, physically, intellectually, or spiritually, and that we needed to do something about that. So Fred, in the spirit of what you've had to say, we decided to do something. We decided to get after it a bit. And hence came this project, Faith in Action, with the word principally driven toward leaning toward action. And the actions that we've taken, you've witnessed today. We thought it was important to bring thought leaders to our community who would inspire deeper thinking, more careful thinking about justice, including poverty, social justice issues, including poverty. We thought it would also be important, as has been mentioned here, to honor those who are serving in proximity to the issues, those who are on the ground addressing youth and families who could use a hand up. And our thought was we probably didn't need many more not-for-profits. We needed to inspire collaboration among those who were already in the community. Bring them together and invite them to share their best experiences, their best practices, hence the spring conference. We bring thought leaders here once a year in the fall to keep the community aware of the challenge and issue. We bring our service partners together in the spring, encouraging them to share their best practices. And then we thought about one other thing that could be helpful, a grants program. And frankly, for a theological seminary to be a grant maker is a little bit of stretch. And so our family decided we would help develop a process through which grants could be made that would be catalytic grants to organizations like Elevate early in its time in Indianapolis, grants to School on Wheels, a very novel program to keep children and families engaged in education even when they were in a period of transition or without homes. And we're now in year 7 of that grant-making process. Many of our grantees, we've made about 30 grants. This year we'll cross $1 million in total funds granted. And Lindsay challenged you when we came today, meet 4 new friends. My challenge to you is meet with some of the grantees who are here today. There's an open forum, I think, near the end of the day. But take time to meet with the grantees, learn what you can from them about the process, and take advantage of the opportunity. I've already invited one friend. I'm looking at him right across the way. I said, my pastor friend, I want to see your grant application when this program is over. He promised me that'll happen. So I'm inviting all of you who have not been in the program, bring your best proposals forward. They will be juried by an independent group, not just Faith in Action volunteers, and we will do our best to keep that grant program going in a way that will grow the service of organizations like Providence, Cristo Rey, and like Elevate. So thanks for letting me share a few thoughts with you. Now I hope you have a great lunch. Thanks.
right, now we get to adjourn to lunch. We encourage you to use the table cards for conversation and mingle and meet your 4 new people, and feel free to ask the panelists questions. The other thing I was going to say is I love the Q&A. Keep it coming. What I'm thinking about is using some of those questions for newsletter articles, and perhaps if you feel inspired to answer some of them or blog about them, I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights. So, okay, enjoy lunch. Hello, I hope everyone had a great lunch and a good chance to recharge. And we are blessed to have a couple more panels this afternoon. If you haven't answered this question, we would really welcome your input. We're excited for Heather McGee to come this fall and really want to just take the opportunity to gain a little input. Before we start, I really wanted, I talked to John Ray, who helps lead our chapel, and I really wanted to bring a song. Just again, this is a chance for us to step away from work, spiritually recharge, and learn a lot. So if I could ask now Rachel Martin Clark and John Ray to join us on stage, that'd be great.
How's everybody doing? This song just simply says, you make me happy, you make me whole, you take the pain away, and I'm so in love with you. You make me happy, you make me whole, and you take the pain away, I'm so in love with you. You make me happy, you make me whole, and you take the pain away, I'm so in love with you. And everything about you is right, covers all my wrong, your life saved my life. And everything about you is right, covers all my your life saved my life. With you is where I belong. Yeah. Oh, you make me happy. You make me whole. You take the pain away. I'm so in love with you. You make me happy. You make me whole. You take the pain away. I'm so in love with you. Everything about you is right. Covers all my wrong. Your life saved my life. Everything about you is so right. Covers all my wrong. Your life saved my life. Everything about you is right. Covers all my wrong. Your life saved my life. Everything about you is right. Covers all my wrong. Your life saved my life. With you is where I belong. I belong here. Yeah. So in love with you. Can't make it without you. I live to worship you. Forever me and you. I'm so in love with you. Can't make it without you. I live to worship you. Forever me and you. I'm so in love with you. Can't make it without you. I live to worship you. Forever me and you. One more time. I'm so in love. live to worship you. Forever me and you last time. So in love with you. Can't make it without you. I live to worship you. Forever me and you. And everything about you is right. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, John. So our next panel, we get to introduce David Palmer and Jamal Hamid from Purposeful Design. And we have Patrice Duckett-Brown and Ophelia Lumpkin from Faye Bickard Glick Center. Please help me welcome them to the stage, as well as our moderator, Sarah Van Slambrook.
Let's give another round of applause, please, for our praise and worship as we get started again this afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, and that I promise we will have a invigorating conversation here that does not let you get into that post-lunch lull. So if you need to, stretch it out, but we will have a great conversation here. I am really excited to be joined by some great leaders here in our community, and we are switching gears from youth to adults as we are talking about what does it mean to walk alongside adults in our community who are trying to access living wage jobs, to be able to support themselves, to be able to support their families in order to have that honor and dignity that each person deserves to have. And so I like to start with Patrice, if you don't mind. And first, just tell us a little bit about Faye Bickard Glick Neighborhood Center. What population, what neighborhoods, what community does your center serve? And tell us a little bit about your community so that we can have kind of a better understanding of who you're working with.
So we are the Faye Bickard Glick Neighborhood Center of Crooked Creek, formerly Crooked Creek Multi-Service Center. We've been in existence since 1984. We're right at 71st and Michigan Road, next to Church's Chicken, if you know that place. We really focus and support Pike and Washington Township, and we are one of 12 other community centers within the city that provide social service support for clients and residents within that area. Our focus is really supporting social services for families that need services for infants all the way up to seniors, which we call our recycled teenagers, and they are. And with that services, we provide enough support and resources and partnerships that will help them lead to financial freedom or financial stability for that family. So we're talking about education, child care support, preschool, making sure that they are excelling, being globally competitive as students, so that when they go into school, they're ready to go and able to go outside of the boundaries and really make an impact on the economy, really helping families get past some of their stresses and barriers, trying to eliminate as many as possible. So we talk about rental assistance, utility assistance, education. Now we really are focusing post-COVID around mental health, so providing mental health on the spot for our families, which has been one of our biggest barriers that we see here in our communities.
Thanks, Patrice. So as we think about work and how to walk alongside individuals who are trying to reach for that next job or that better job, what is your organization doing, and what are you seeing that works best in connecting residents to those resources, some of which you just mentioned that are kind of wrapping around the whole person, but also what about the specific ones that are about job access and skill readiness and all of those pieces to get jobs?
Well, we're fortunate to be located on the north side of Indianapolis. We are the furthest community center on the in Indianapolis and Marion County, so we are the furthest north. So we have an opportunity to build relationships with Park 100 in the medical field off of 86th Street. So our goal is to help our families receive certifications and trainings to be prepared for that workforce. So you'll see in our organization a lot of HVAC training or certification opportunities, warehouse opportunities, working with partners like Azul, working with St. Vincent and their training facility around medical academy, and also patient access, pharmacy technician, to help those individuals get into workforce development and getting to a workable, livable wage that fits the Pike and Washington Township area, which their cost of living is a lot higher than what we think about in the inner city circle. The other thing about our community is that 85% of our community are high school graduates, which is different from the inner city circle. Mm-hmm. So our goal really is focusing on secondary education, not necessarily college, but certifications, extra training, so they're prepared for the jobs that are out in their area.
Do you do those on site? Do you partner with others? What does that look like in terms of connecting them to those different types of skilling up?
We do some of our programs on site. Our pharmacy technician is on site. Our HVAC and warehouse certifications are on site. And when we do that, again, it's all about eliminating barriers. So we have child care services for them. We make sure that the children are fed. We have our preschool teachers that are certified, so as they're going to class, the children are being tutored or even being educated on something different to help ensure that the entire family is supported. Along with, once they start their program with us, we provide them with wraparound services, so keeping the barriers low as much as possible. If rental assistance is on their head or on their mind, we're trying to eliminate that. We really focus around the Maslow hierarchy and making sure that we finish out those bottom bases first, so that the only thing they can think about is success.
Terrific, thank you. So, Ophelia, you have been engaged over time with some of the services at Faber-Carglick, your neighbor in that community, and we're really grateful that you're here to share a little bit more about your experience. And could you just maybe start by telling us a little bit about your experience, and particularly as it comes to obtaining a job that supports you, supports your family, and being able to maintain it. So, a lot of the things that Patrice talked about that can get in the way. What has been your experience around that?
The main things that get in the way is like having affordable childcare and being able to find a job to, to pay for your bills and stuff without still struggling. I'd say since working at Faber-Car, it has helped me. I get child care. They have different services and like different programs and stuff that I take and do. So.
That's great. How many kids do you have?
I have two, a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Awesome. That's terrific. So the 5-year-old is enrolled with Faber-Carglick?
Yes.
That's terrific. Finding access to child care that is high quality is so difficult in our community and around our country. And so that is amazing that that's something that you were able to do on site and that you were able to connect with. So I know that can be a huge barrier. So I'm so glad that you were able to find that. What has been maybe one of the things that you have found that has been like, the most successful or the biggest contributor to getting over that hump in terms of getting a job?
I would say not giving up and having supporters, people that really support you and actually care about what you're doing and where you're going in life.
That's great. I hear hope in that, right?
Yes.
That people that believe in you. Patrice, maybe you might have some thoughts on like how does your team provide that? What does that look like when people come to you? How are you providing that sort of hope or those connection points that people that believe in them?
Well, one of the things about our programs and our center is that we really focus on being innovative, and a lot of our staff are single moms or moms and low-income individuals, or started off as low-income individuals, educated but still are struggling or at that level. And so when we look at our programs, we want to make sure that the experience that anyone who comes to our doors goes through is something that we would want to go through or we've been through, but we want to make it better. So you'll see a lot of additional support around each client so that they feel comfortable and they build that trust with us because they know that we understand what that pathway looks like. And when we work with those clients, we really provide them a lot of support and resources as they go along. One of the things about each one of my staff is that they are considered case managers. So it's not a lot of moving around once you come through our doors. When you come in our doors, the first person you talk to will be the person you work with for at least a year or so. So you're not being shuffled around. And then we're immediate around the services, so you don't have an opportunity to give up, right? And so for Ophelia, she started as a client. And I can also say that 90% of our staff are women. And so women and moms, and we're kind of pushy. And African American women, right? People of color. So we're really pushy about making sure that every woman is successful. And so when they come in the door, we don't give them a chance to give up. And we're going to push them along the way. And even when it makes them uncomfortable, guide them to let them know it's okay to step out of your comfort zone. But in order to get to where you need to be, getting out of your comfort zone will open up so many other doors.
I love that. I love that, not giving them a chance to give up. That's really powerful. Well, switching gears to David. David, you've been doing work in the community for lots of years now in lots of different ways, working with individuals who've experienced homelessness, have experienced all sorts of challenges in their lives. Tell me a little bit about purposeful design, just so for our audience, for some who may not have kind of that general context. And then how do you equip the individuals that you're working with to be able to be successful in their next step in achieving work?
Thank you. I will. And if I could make it just a general comment first, it's really an honor to be here. What I feel whenever I come to these Faith in Action events is just citizens with a heart for other citizens and trying to do something about it. And it brings to mind, for me, a little exposure to the heart of Jesus in the Gospels, where in the book of Matthew it says that Jesus was traveling through the towns and the villages, teaching the gospel and healing everybody where he went. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And I just like that look into the heart of Jesus, and I feel that here in this room, and it's really encouraging to me. And I just want to thank everybody for sharing that with me. And I think compassion has to do with not only feeling something for somebody that may be hurting or struggling, but also being moved to action, which is faith in action. It's that combination, which is so present here in this room. And Purposeful Design has been around about 9 years, and it was founded then to do two things. It was founded to create jobs for some who would like a job, but there's some kind of obstacle or lots of obstacles perhaps between them and employment. And then secondly, so that's our purpose number one, create jobs. And secondly, to do on-the-job discipling. We feel that we don't want to neglect the inner person, sort of like Jesus fed people, but he also fed them spiritually. And we sense that if we were to only provide a job without helping, hopefully to help strengthen the inner person, it'd be a little bit like putting a Band-Aid on a big gaping wound, probably not going to stick real well. So we like to address both sides of the coin, if you will. And so what we do is we hire, we have two sides to what we do. One is employment, and the other is a school. And Maggie Poplin, who I'm looking at right there, runs our school, does a great job of it. But so on the employment side, we hire men coming out of places like homeless missions or off the street who've been in a world of struggle, but who have found enough, have gained enough stability in their life and perhaps found enough distance from an addiction where they're ready to give work a try, and they want to give work a try. We hire them and train them to make beautiful furniture out of wood and steel and some other materials, and then we sell the furniture that we make And we sell it to the commercial marketplace, to places like schools, universities, hospitals, airports, and so forth. And then create a revenue stream to fund the jobs that way, and cover about 80 to 90% of our operating costs through sales of the things that the men we serve make themselves.
Tremendous. Tell me more about this discipleship, the feeding the inside part. What is that? We talked about hope just a few minutes ago. How are you feeding the hope in the work that you do?
It's a good question. It's a profound question. That tells you that I don't think I have a real good handle on what's the formula. I think it is, like we heard a lot this morning, and like we just heard, is a lot of life on life. Let's have a relationship, and let's walk for a while together. But everything that we do, a big part of what we do is, everything we do is on the platform of work and responsibility. So what we like to do is find some folks that have been, someone has shared some needed relief with them to help them get to a point where they can stand up and take that next step. And then we like to say, okay, now let's get to work, and let's show up, and let's learn to do it right, and come in with a learner's attitude, and let's all get along. Lots of different kinds of people coming from different places, and we learn some good work practices. And so I think the whole process is a hope-giving process, at least we want it to be, where you're shouldered up, you're working hard side by side with somebody else that hopefully you can trust, as opposed to maybe some folks you've run with in the past couldn't trust or shouldn't trust. They weren't really helping you get to a better place. And now you're in an environment where there's some folks that are all trying to move in the same direction together, and some trust. One of the things that's really important part of our culture is that we spend about 30 to 45 minutes every day all together, 10:15 to 10:45 or 11. And it's a real culture building part of our effort, where it's a combination of some training, some job skills training and safety. We run big, dangerous saws and all kinds of things like that, where we need to train in safety. We need to train in the basic job mechanics. But we also have a piece where each person in the room, and there's usually 25 or 30 of us or so, each person's responsible for something, like it could be Jamil's month to be responsible for asking each of us, what are you thankful for today? And we have that drill. We actually share, here's what we're thankful for today. Or somebody else that might be responsible for some aspect of lean manufacturing we call 5S, and it's something we all have to learn and practice. So somebody else is responsible for taking us through the drill of that. So there's something about just the simple learning and practicing it, but then there's also the leadership component, where you got to stand up and you got to lead now for a little bit. And then there's a discipleship component that we weave into that as well, where we borrow something from the Bible and say, what does this tell us about God's way versus man's way? And what do we make of that? And how might we walk that path? And then we pray together. So those are some of the different kinds of things. But another component which was not planned, in fact, most of what we're doing was not planned. It's really a walk of faith. We're trying to learn as we go. But one of the elements that has arisen, and which really serves us well, is that a bunch of us now live together in the neighborhood, not in the same house necessarily, although some of us do, but at least within a block or two of each other. And that's been really good. I often hear from some of the men that I work with there that they might say something like, well, I'm just not ready yet to go back out and stand on that same street corner yet. I'm not ready for that yet. And so with a bunch of us living together in close proximity, within a block or two in the same neighborhood, we have new relationships, and we see each other out on the street or on the corner, or we have a meal together, or a couple nights ago, Jamil and I went out for dinner together. We might help each other in the lawn together, help each other with the car, or give a ride. And so it's new relationships, and I think that's hope-giving too, because it then kind of I'm taken out of that old battlefield where it was just one wound after another, one disappointment after another. Those are some of the pieces.
Thank you. Those are some profound pieces there. I think we'll need to keep pulling on. But I want to turn to Jamil, and give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about how those things have taken shape for you in your role at Purposeful Design. Where were you before, and where are you now in terms of just life trajectory and an outlook in terms of what you're hoping for and where you are now?
So I've been at Purposeful Design for about 3.5, roughly 4 years now. And when I first, we was just talking about this earlier. When I first started working at Purposeful Design, I was not very responsible. I wasn't very responsible. I just wanted to say that I had a job or whatnot, and just saying that I had a job or whatnot just kind of made me feel somewhat secure. It was satisfied in a way. But the longer I started working there, and the more responsibility that I took on has changed me for sure. I look at myself sometimes and I just think like 3-4 years ago I would not recognize who I am. I actually come into work now with a purpose. I get up now on time. I used to be famous for being tardy. That was my thing. Tardy, calling in or whatnot. I get in my own way, and I let everything else in the world get in my way. And I just realized a lot of time was passing by. My friends still mostly do the same thing or whatnot, and some of them are incarcerated, some of them are in worse situations than they were before. And I'm still alive, thank God. I'm still alive. I'm able to walk down the street, and I'm not confined to one space, and I'm in good health. Things that I take for granted a lot, but lately, over the past couple of years, I've just been really trying to think like, where am I heading or whatnot, and all the lessons that I learned at PD, mostly the people who work there, no matter if you're out on the production floor side or if you're on the office side, I kind of be around the shop, around the whole building a little bit or whatnot, and I notice a lot of things, whether they notice that I notice or not, but I notice, and being 26, I'm still in my mid-20s or whatnot, still kind of young. So it's just been real helpful to be given the opportunity to be responsible for something, for them to believe in me and to even give me the responsibility, because you go to most places or whatnot, they'll just see that, I haven't gone to college. I didn't even finish high school. I got my GED though, but I didn't finish high school, and a lot of people look down on that. But these people, they care about you. They check up with you. They don't just worry about the work side. They also care about how are you doing, and we feed each other with the Word of God and just try to lift each other up. It's just so much of my life has changed because people are willing to give you a chance. So that's all you can ask for, really.
Amazing. So you talked about a lot of different ways that your life has changed. Could you maybe give an example of one contribution to that success, and then think about, because you now supervise other people who are who are at PD now, and so how do you take what you learned, or that contribution to your own success, and help then bring that to more men that are in your under your care, that are looking to you to be their leader?
You were asking the right questions. We was just talking about that earlier today too. But so I actually, just listening to the people who were up here previously, have given me a lot of different perspectives or whatnot, ways I can improve on communicating, interacting with my coworkers. But so a regular day, at PD, at least in my role, is going in and whatnot, and of course we got to work. So I try to get somewhat of a plan on how we're going to start work, and things don't always go according to plan. So so I improvise a lot of whatnot, and what I've been noticing recently about working with my team is that everybody has a different personality. Everybody responds to things in a different way. Everybody picks up on things in different ways, learn in different ways or whatnot. So I try to be flexible and in the way that I do things or whatnot, and I try to encourage, as well as, you know, point out things that can be improved upon or whatnot. I think about how I'm explaining things or whatnot, and I try to also, how should I word it? I try to also give energy to the whole team or whatnot, because sometimes, you know, people have those days or they're not having a good time or whatnot. You gotta kind of lift up the spirits a little bit. So it's just, I'm learning so many things that at other jobs I never really had to deal with, because, you know, it was just like a whatever type job. Like, they didn't care that much about me, I didn't care that much about them. But it's just, I'm learning so much. I'm growing each and every day that I work there. So with each day I just get better at trying to be the best version of myself for the team, not just, you know, just to be better or whatnot.
Can I give a quick example?
Please.
At Purposeful Design, we, on purpose, don't hire the cream of the crop. If you were looking for employees, that's not what we go for. We really look for what an average employer might say is the bottom of the barrel, because we're looking to help people that are way upstream and that really need a helping hand. And so when Jamil supervises, he's not supervising like Sarah, but he's supervising somebody that's probably really struggled a lot and probably still struggling a bunch. So it's an extra challenge for Jamil. For example, one of the craftsmen that we had, which is what we refer to all of our workers as craftsmen, and they really are, they're skilled craftsmen. But one was standing at his workstation a while back, and I had noticed him just standing there, not working, but standing there. And so I went out and just said, how are you doing? What's going on? And he said, he just looked at me with kind of a blank stare, and he said, I was incarcerated. I've been incarcerated he'd just come out. I was incarcerated for 20 years. I don't know how to make decisions. And so that's not too different than the starting point with a lot of the kinds of individuals that Jamil is learning to supervise. So to be a good supervisor in that environment is especially noteworthy, I think.
Absolutely. And the way that you described it, Jamil, of you know, wanting to be your best version of yourself, not just for you but for others, and that that you're there to bring the energy and to, you know, to lift them up when they need it. I mean, that's leadership. And I don't know if you see yourself as a leader, but I hope that you do, as you are, you know, are listening to us here, because we are all seeing you as that leader that you are. That's really tremendous.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Patrice and David, one of the things that, you know, as we talk about this work and how much work it is to, you know, it's not just finding a job, but it is helping with housing, it's helping with how do we make decisions, it's all these different pieces. How do you assess a person's readiness for this? And then one of the questions that the crowd had lifted up was, what happens with someone who does give up, or who chooses that they don't want to do whatever it is that you're offering for them, for this opportunity in this moment? So how do you assess who is ready, and what do you do if someone isn't ready or isn't moving in the direction that your program ideally would want them to?
All right, so I have a little longer question or a longer answer as I was reading these up here. I was like, ooh. One of the things about when we talk about people giving up, we really have to look at the entire environment. And sometimes it is not just the person, it is the environment and the barriers that causes them to get to that point. And so if we're looking at that bigger picture and what's around them, when we talk about barriers, it's not necessarily rent. It may not necessarily be utilities, but we're talking about mental health. We're talking about family support, transportation. Those are barriers that will give them an opportunity to step back. When we look at the Maslow hierarchy, there's things that they gotta have in order for them to even think straight. You cannot expect them to be successful in this world if they have to figure out how they feed their children in the evening. That necessarily is not their fault. That is what's going on in their community. They don't have a grocery store. They don't have a place to go get groceries. They don't have transportation. So we are looking at those pieces to keep them from getting to that point. I also use and train all of our staff around value programming, and where they receive their programming before they were 16 around their values really determines how they move when they have jolting life experiences like death and education and birth and jobs. And if those values are jumbled up, like for instance in the 50s, religion was first. 60s, education was second. In the 70s, education became first again. Now, it's friends, it's technology, it's media. So when we look at where their values are coming from, it determines how they move outside of their work or outside of their life. And we have to recognize that and make sure that those barriers or those values are being addressed, because if not, they'll jolt back to the bad habits that they had before or to the generational curses or generational things that they were dealing with early, right? Mm-hmm. So in order for us as social service, faith-based organizations to make sure that these individuals are successful, we're looking at them as a part of the environment and not just the individual, right? Not a very religious person, but Jesus didn't give up on us. So we cannot give up on the next person, right? And we have to really start looking at how do we help them, and it's not necessarily always their fault.
Thank you.
In terms of assessing readiness, I think we rely largely on two things. One is that we have lots of sending partners, what you might call relief agencies, homeless missions and others that spend time with an individual and get to know that individual and can make assessments on our behalf in terms of readiness. And so we have lots of good partnerships that work in that way. And we say, okay, we need to hire, and who do you have? And they say, okay, we've got these 2 or 3 individuals that look to us like they're ready to go. So that's a big help. And then we also have, I mentioned that we have a school, and we actually have an entry pipeline process where the first step with us is our school. It's called Advance. And maybe there are people here that we ought to connect with to facilitate more co-laboring with individuals. We'd love to put your people in our school, Advance. It's a good school. And if an individual graduates from that school, which is just a couple of weeks in length, if they graduate from that, then they're automatically given an opportunity to move right into an apprentice opportunity, either with us at Purposeful Design or with another partner of ours. So a paid, really well-paid, good environment sort of apprenticeship. And if they graduate from that, then there's an automatic job opportunity following that's presented to them. Again, with a really good, healthy employment environment and good pay and most likely benefits. So a person can move really quickly, say within 60 days from I was at Wheeler Mission to, wow, I all of a sudden have a good job in a good environment with good pay and benefits. So that's kind of our assessment process, and it's working well. There was a time when we didn't have any of that, and we would just, if the person, this was my first idea, to show you what I know. My first idea was if you're breathing and you say you want to work, then come on, we'll give you a job. And that didn't work so well in many cases. So we found that this other process is some gates that need to be passed along the way. And in terms of how do we help people keep going in the hope and so forth, one of the keys I do think is we try and flood our place with encouragement. And that looks like a lot of different things. But there's another piece that I think is really important too, encouragement plus patience, because we're all learning and the folks we hire are learning, and lots of things have to be learned sort of all at once. a lot of different skills, life skills, different habits, and plus work skills. And so patience is a key piece of that as well.
How do you embed those softer skill learning moments in the work that you're doing? You are saying it all starts with a job platform, but I hear you talking about some softer skills, about making sure that you're on time. We heard from Jamil, and that you were saying, needing patience because people are learning those softer skills. How do you help people learn those skills, and how is that embedded in how you approach it?
I think a lot of it has to do actually with our leadership team. And Matt Jesch, who's our Vice President of Production, is here as well. And Matt, as well as others on our team, have hearts of compassion, actually. And that's a real thing. And they care. And I think it starts with that. And I think it goes from there rather simply. If you care, and if you have compassion, and you're with someone, you notice things, and you're moved to do something, to say something, to put a hand around the shoulder, or to hug, or stop and pray with, or to offer to come to lunch together. It looks like 1,000 different things, I think, but it starts with caring.
Thanks, David. So another one of the questions that came up from our audience is about who is able to participate in your program. So the question was specifically about folks outside of your township area, because Patrice was talking about the townships that she works in. How do people get into your programs? Maybe that we can kind of start from that, from general, but if you could also touch on if they're outside of a geographic area, what does that mean?
So we do focus on Pike and Washington Township, which is a big area, but we also touch on Zionsville, Carmel, and Fisher, because they don't have social services support around in that area. Anyone can walk through our doors and receive services. But because our catchment area is so large, we do what we call like a mobile community center. And we take our community center and we literally pick up our staff, go to apartment complexes, and we set up shop as if we're a community center inside the apartments. Coming from a grassroots background, every location you live in is a community, and so it should be treated as such, and every community needs a community center. So we do a lot of mobile services where we can provide that resource and resources that are exactly the same thing at our center in our apartment complexes throughout Pike and Washington Township. Now, as far as individuals that are outside of our area, our catchment area, we typically do not turn anyone away. But as I said earlier, we have 12 other community centers similar to mine that really focuses on the need of that culture and that community. We have organizations like MLK, which is Martin Luther King Community Center off of 40th and 40th and Meridian. Thank you. We have Hawthorne Community Center, which is in the heart of Hawthorne. Krista Moore House. You have Cafe on the east side off of Post Road. Bonner Center, pretty sure a lot of you know about Bonner Center on the east side, 10th Street. So they are doing the same things that we do in our community center, but they're really focused, just like we do, on that culture of that community to make sure the services are being managed. But we do not turn anyone away. Those community centers do not turn anyone away. If they're in need and they took the time to come through our doors, we're going to make sure that we help them along the way.
Thank you, Patrice.
We're located on the near east side. Our physical plant is at 16th and Sherman, and we love that location. It's close to maybe where a lot of our folks tend to come from, reside in one way or another. And on the bus line, some people ride bikes or scooter or share a ride, or even some from the neighborhood can walk or whatever, easy to get there. We welcome everybody. We have a lot of corporate partners, and once a corporate partner in a good-hearted way said, "How inclusive are you guys?" And I kind of laughed and said, "We're really inclusive." It's far from being a lot of, boy, it should be boring if it was a lot of me's, and it's not a lot of me's. There's all different kinds of people coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, and we welcome that. That's what we want.
How do people hear about your work and then get into the advanced program? So part of it you said was other service providers give you referrals? Is that kind of the main way that people get connected?
It is primarily. We partner with probably 15 or more, maybe 20 organizations around town that want a good place to send folks as they hopefully are getting prepared to take a step outside of the nest, so to speak. So a lot of partnering and a lot of sending. Mm-hmm.
Terrific. So one of the questions that was asked, hopefully, Ophelia, you had a chance to read it before I put it on you specifically, but one of the questions that was asked is, if you could tell the community one thing about how to best support individuals in under-resourced neighborhoods, what would you say?
I would say, just help them as much as you can. Put in the extra leg work. Exhaust our resources, whether you have to go outside of that neighborhood or community. Just don't give up on them. Don't stop.
Thank you. I certainly have heard from folks around this these chairs that same notion of don't give up, keep going. And I hope that people in our audience here have also felt and heard that, the need to walk alongside, and that's not always like a straight line. Sometimes it's curvy, sometimes there's ups and downs, sometimes there's doors slammed along the way, but that continuing to keep up and keep going is really important. So thank you for sharing that. One of the other questions, and Patrice, you mentioned this briefly, but maybe you could go a little bit more deeply into it. But how do folks get help with mental health? Mental health has been something that our community and all communities have struggled with for a long time. And it maybe wasn't until COVID that we all got used to saying that out loud and acknowledging the problem that it is. I know that you have been working in that space for since pre-COVID, but what does that look like today for you and for your community?
So as far as funding goes, we were very fortunate to be a community center that received funding from local funders such as United Way, Lilly Endowment, to help us really focus around mental health and what that looks like for the community. And so the way that we took our funds, we did a couple of things. Was one, we created a mental health office within our building. So we have one location where individuals can come at any time, Monday through Friday, and receive services. If a client comes in and is in crisis, we have a therapist on site that can come out of the office, pull them in, and kind of help de-escalate and get them situated so that we can figure out the problems that's going on. We also work with another entity called Empower Living, which works with us on the outside and hosts a lot of online therapy classes that we pay for. If Medicaid or benefits do not pay for that, we'll use some of our grant funds to take care of that for individuals. So working with two different mental health partners has been really beneficial for us, because what we know is that people are now more comfortable to talk about the need of mental health. Getting the access to get to the mental health support, the therapists, the counselors, to be able to talk to someone is limited, because now it's such a comfortable conversation and a comfortable step. But getting connected has been very difficult. And so, again, our goal is to eliminate barriers. So you don't have to wait to figure out what therapist is open. Does it accept my insurance? Will you accept me to come into your office, or do I have to do Zoom when I have technology issues? We have someone that can come in, get you registered, take an intake assessment, and then find you a counselor as you sit there in their office. So that's that automatic walk with, so they don't have the opportunity again to walk away like, yeah, I was at this state, very low state in my mind. I went to go get some help. Nobody helped me, and I walked away. It may be okay tomorrow, but the next day may not be okay. So we don't want that to happen, and so we want to be able to provide that access for those individuals. The other thing is the sneaky stuff we do. When we have programming for our families, we have a program called PAL, which is powerful women, uplifting women. And that program is a program of mothers that come in on Saturdays, and they get just a social service kind of support system on how do they help get through life together. Well, in that session, they have a therapist sitting there with them. They have focus groups, so there's a topic that they talk about in every one of those sessions once a month. And then after they get comfortable with talking with a therapist about open-ended questions, the next year they're getting free mental health services that they can do individually. So they're in therapy without knowing they're in therapy. But it makes it more comfortable, right? Because they're in a group versus just being individualized. And then also we have a men's group called Project Determined. And that is a social service group specifically for males. So it's just not cookie cutter approach around single moms and how we help single moms. This is how we help males that are really looking for that extra support system. And so in order to be in that program, you come to a focus group as well. So they're playing cards, dominoes, chess, watching sports, playing basketball. As they're sitting down eating, they're in a focus group with a licensed therapist, and they're talking about everyday life. And so they get comfortable with being able to talk about their feelings and issues and things that are really bothering them. So by the time they get so comfortable with that, we move them into that individualized therapy session.
I like the sneaky part. Got to learn from you. I think that we at Purposeful Design don't deal with probably the most severe of mental health issues. We're not really equipped for that. But we do deal with mental health issues on a certain level. And one of the things that we're learning, and this doesn't take care of everything, but there is one who is called the Prince of Peace, and the one who said, "Peace I giveth." And so we do turn to that Prince of Peace regularly, and the key way we do that is by picking up the Bible and reading what it says, what he has to say. And I know that lots of us, like I think I heard Jamil say that I was my own biggest obstacle. And I've heard lots of people say that. And a lot of it's, and a lot of times, and for me personally, what I probably need, one of the things I need most in life, my wife would agree with this, is I need my thinking set straight. And we often find that our thinking is set straight as we open up God's Word.
What is something that you are most proud of?
Something I'm most proud of. Okay, I got something. So recently, I was talking to one of my coworkers or whatnot, and he was telling me about something that happened to him, and we talked about it for a good little minute, about like 10, 15 minutes, and at the end of the conversation, he was just like, I appreciate you, just listening or whatnot. Most people just either don't take me seriously or just think that I'm joking or something. And I was like, no problem, bro. And I think just that feeling of just listening, hearing somebody out or whatnot, just showing somebody that you care, no matter how small, the favor or the act of kindness that you do or whatnot. I felt a little bit proud that I'm actually somebody he considers a friend, and was able to confide in me sometimes. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. That is beautiful. Thanks, Jimmy. Ophelia?
I would say being where I am today, I would say 2 years ago I never thought, I'll be doing this. I'm making a livable wage, living comfortably, taking care of my kids. So just like being everything that I am right now.
Thank you. Can we give them a round of applause for this? Being able to have a job where you are taking care of your kids and doing that because of the hard work that you've put into that over the last 2 years. It's not something to be understated. So congratulations on that. So we're getting close to time, but I do want to make sure that we leave the audience with some tips for them in terms of how, I guess, first thing is, how can people here help you in the work that you're doing? So that would be the first part, and then we'll close with one more just in terms of kind of general advice. But let's start with, how could they help you do your work?
Two things pop to mind. One is that we have a furniture building factory, and that's how we provide the platform of work and responsibility for the people we serve. So we love furniture orders. And if you're with an organization, perhaps, that
there you go, yeah,
a business or a church that needs furniture, we'd love to talk to you about providing furniture, beautiful, durable, high-quality furniture for you. We love work to do. And then secondly, I mentioned the school that we run called Advance, and we have a team of 20 or 30 volunteer instructors. And I think everyone here would be a great instructor in our school. Pick off a class, the lessons are already prepared, PowerPoints, easy to teach from, and a wide spectrum of curriculum topics, everything from physical fitness to diet to social skills to good work habits and lots of others as well. So that'd be it, to volunteer to teach in our school. It's very rewarding and fulfilling and lots of fun.
Thanks, David. Patrice?
All right, I have a couple. So for our larger faith-based organizations that do benevolence and help people within their area with rental assistance and social service assistance, one thing that can really help myself, community centers, and others that are around your area is really looking at the impact of benevolence and looking at it from a support system and not just a handout. So really doing case management for those individuals, really kind of seeing what the need is. Sometimes it's the quick way to go is to go to the church. The church is going to give just because that's what they do, and it doesn't help. And so being able to take a step back and really look at it to make sure that those individuals really need the help. Faber-Carr-Glick has a program called FATE. With FATE, we manage benevolence funds for churches. We do case management for those clients. The church refers them over to us. We provide the case management, give them the funds if they need it, and then the wraparound services still continue to go with them versus just giving them a handout. And it keeps them from staying in that cycle of poverty where they're going from church to church to church, especially on the Northwest side when we have mega churches in our area, in a sense, and they can go to almost 12 different churches in 12 months and get their rent paid, right? So trying to break that cycle. The other piece is when you're thinking about social services like ours and community centers is that if a faith-based organization would like to volunteer and support, my volunteer and support I would like is longevity and sustainability. You can come in and, put some canned goods up and plant some seeds for me and help me garden for our raised beds, for our food pantry. But if you really want to be impactful, help us mentor our families. Like come in for a year and work with one family, walk them through the process, be there for them when they go through their hardest times, and be able to talk to them, pray with them, and support them when we can't do it. That's more impactful to me than stocking my food pantry. And then the other piece is always financially, right? If you want to help families, knowing that we will make sure that we're really looking at barriers and not just a handout. Our financial support, your financial support will be towards helping financial freedom and getting them to sustainability. So, yeah.
Thank you. And so for those that are either already in the midst of doing work through their congregation, through their own faith community, or are thinking about starting that, what piece of advice, or and this could be for any of the four of you, what would you share with them in terms of how do you do this well?
I would say, like I said earlier, look at the entire environment and not the individual. Like their situation, most of the time is not them. It is really based on where they came from and where they're trying to go and what's comfortable for them. And so if we look at that entire environment, you're able to change the their perception and where they're going, and getting rid of that fear for them so that they can be successful. So when you're doing this work, it's very tiring, but it's so rewarding when we're being patient and we're allowing time and trust to move us more than just the success.
Thank you. And I would say step out of your comfort zone. Don't get too comfortable, doing what you're doing. And just never give up on yourself.
Thanks, Olivia. David, Jamil?
Well, I think for me, at least, there's just an attitude adjustment. I really like to take care of myself, please myself, make sure I'm comfortable, and that my life I'm surrounded by all the things that I like. And so I think for me, there's a big discovery made in that there's a great joy found in serving others. And actually, it's more beneficial to give than to receive. So just taking a step.
I'll just say have empathy, patience, and just have a heart that's always open to just receiving those problems and struggles from others, and just try to always do the most that you can if you can.
Thank you, Jamil. So please join me in thanking all of our panelists. The work that you are doing on behalf of yourselves, Jamil and Ophelia, on behalf of others in our community, not just at your sites, but in coming to places like this, the ripple effect of those that you work with individually is much bigger than one person at a time. And so we really value and treasure the work that you're doing. I will walk away with encouragement plus patience, David. That was something I wrote down for myself that has stuck with me. So thank you for each of you for the words that you shared with all of us today. And we'll turn it back over to you.
Jamal and Ophelia, you guys have a lot to be proud of, so we wish you the best in your coming days. And thank you again for your leadership, Patrice and David, and sharing your insights with us this afternoon. So as they exit, we have one final panel, and I'm so excited to bring up Dave Miner, Kimberly Simmons, and we have Pastor Linda McCrae. So if you guys would join me on stage, that would be great. One of the things that, as I was thinking about how do we end our day, I mean, the two panels have been phenomenal. It's hard to top those, but I really wanted to hear from them about how do we start at home? How do we start right in our own organization? So I'm really excited for this next panel discussion and hope you are too.
Okay, we are in the home stretch. I have figured out how to use the audience questions the second time around, so we will get to more of those in this one too. Appreciate your patience with me the first time around when I didn't think to look at it until we were more out of time. So we are figuring out the technology. So glad to have three special guests with us here to close out the conversations. And thank you all for sticking with us to the end here. So this is meant to be about bringing it home. How do we translate what we heard today and what we're going to hear from our guests here today to help us think about how do we make changes? How do we do the good work? How do we work toward livable, sustainable wages for all people as a community and as leaders here today? So I'm going to start with Kimberly. And the Urban League has done a lot of work across our community, and more recently with the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. And so maybe you could give us a little bit of context around the Quality of Life Initiative, just big picture in case anyone's not familiar with it. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about the research and the community conversations that you all had around jobs and living wages and the barriers that are existing around that for our community. So let's start there.
Thank you. The Lilly Endowment provided the National Urban League with $100 million to provide services to the African American community in Indianapolis. And so Tony Mason, our president and CEO, came up with a phenomenal idea in partnership with Lilly Endowment and the National Urban League to actually partner with a number of local agencies, individuals that are providing services to the African American community, employers, so on and so forth, in an attempt to be able to identify some of the disparities of the African American community. And so as a result of the many, many, many hours that were dedicated by those collaborative partners, they came up with 5 pillars that needed to be addressed to be able to effectively serve the African American community. One of those pillars was employment. And so according to Marion County data in 2019, 10.2% of African Americans were unemployed in comparison to 3.2% of our white counterparts. And unfortunately, African Americans were 2 times as likely to be impacted by unemployment in comparison to our white counterparts. And so as a result of this survey and as a result of all of the work of all of these phenomenal agencies, individuals, so on and so forth, the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative provided opportunities to local nonprofit agencies to be able to secure funding to support their efforts to address unemployment and other barriers that African Americans were facing in regards to securing and, more importantly, retaining employment. And so I am proud to share that we just literally released the names of the second round of the African American Quality of Life Initiative grants. And both of those awards total well over $10 million that is going back into the community. And so, yes. Yeah, it was a lot of hard work, but we're super proud of that because that will allow these agencies the opportunity to be able to develop or further support some of the programming that they currently have in place to be able to assist African Americans and other individuals of color as well. So that African American Quality of Life Initiative survey is just the starting point for a lot of the work that continues to need to be done within the community.
Thank you, Kimberly. So the data that you just shared with us, 10% versus 3% is terrible and astonishing, but probably not altogether surprising for many people, for the Urban League and the work that you've been doing. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, in addition to all the work with the African American Quality of Life Initiative, what is the Urban League doing to walk alongside people who are accessing work? I know that, before that, at the Quality of Life Initiative and long after that, your organization and you and your leadership in that organization have been doing tons of work around this issue. And so I wanted to give you a chance to speak to that a little bit too.
Thank you. We develop our programming using a common sense approach. Our programs literally have catapulted from under the workforce development umbrella from having one program in 2013 when I started to now having well over 12 or 13 programs under the workforce development banner. As a result of the team coming together and actually developing unique programming, we have been able to assist well over 4,000 individuals just up under the umbrella of our New Beginnings program. Our New Beginnings program was launched in January of 2014, and we are nearing our 10-year anniversary, and it's just been nothing but a blessing to be able to impact the lives of those that come into our building that are seeking the additional services and resources needed to not only be able to secure employment, but more importantly, be able to retain employment. We've also done a really great job at being able to develop additional programming that goes alongside of our New Beginnings program, because we understand that, yes, we need to assist people with securing and retaining employment. However, many of our program participants are in need of being able to earn an industry recognized training credential. And because we knew that that need was of extreme importance, we actually launched our Training Works program as our way of being able to assist those individuals with securing industry recognized training credentials. And so that program has been in existence since 2017, and we have assisted probably well over 600 or 700 individuals with securing industry recognized training credentials. So we understand that it's a team effort. Mm-hmm. Everyone on the team is definitely vested. We have some phenomenal partnerships with other community-based organizations. They help us, we help them. We have great partnerships, of course, with United Way of Central Indiana, Employee Indy, Lilly Endowment, so on and so forth. And it's, of course, Central Christian, church. So we actually launched our entrepreneur program. I'm so sorry, you know my heart. We actually launched our Entrepreneurship Center program as well as an effort to be able to assist individuals with starting their own businesses. And so we're super proud of that accomplishment as well. And we've had the support of many, many in the community for that effort as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Kimberly. Thank you for that good work that I know you're doing on many fronts. I want to switch gears to Pastor McRae. And to, as you are a leader of a congregation, we've been talking about, how do we put this into action? What does it mean to be a champion for justice around work and also embed workplace justice in your congregation? What does that look like for you? How's that taken shape for you?
Thank you. I think my mic's not on. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. So I think your question sort of got at the sort of the external and the internal. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways for churches it might be easier to work on the external. There are lots of great ways to do that that are really, really important. And so, but I think it's also important to look at ourselves as employers. We're not huge employers. We're not Lilly. We're not CTS. But we do have employees. And so at Central Christian Church, which is downtown, historic congregation, I think for a long time we had been sort of, aware of and uncomfortable with the fact that while we talk about the importance of a living wage, we also had employees that were making $10 an hour, or probably less than that when I started 20 years ago. And I think over time, there are, our personnel committee would sit down and go, well, let's try to get them up. And it was such a long, slow work. The thing I've learned about change is that it can come from anywhere. And so sometimes it's the leaders of the organization that promote the change and lead the change, and sometimes it's in this case, the congregants. So in our case, it was COVID also that sort of catapulted us into, it just upended everything, right? So in 2020, we were still on this process of trying to get our hourly employees up closer to a living wage, and we went to our annual meeting where the congregation approves the budget, and some members said, are we paying everybody a living wage? And we're like, no, we're not now, but we're trying to get there. And they said, why not? And so really kind of overnight, we went from paying people $13 an hour to $18 an hour. So we have an employee of 15 years who probably started out at $8 an hour, is now making $19. And it was a mindset, right? We thought we cannot do it. We're a church, right? We're poor. We don't have enough money to do all the things that we want to do. And it just took someone with that vision and being a champion. I think the other thing that happened in terms of our commitment to supporting people in jobs also is our collaboration with the Urban League, which again, with COVID, we, like many congregations, applied for and received a PPP loan, which became a grant because it didn't have to be paid back. And because of the educational work that we've been doing and the reflection we've been doing on systemic racism and economic injustice, at some point we realized that it was relatively easy for us to get that loan. We are a historical institution. We have connections with banks. We've had loans before. We're predominantly white. So it was easy for us to get that. And so we started to think about the fact that it's not easy for all congregations or certainly businesses to get that sort of loan. And so we started reaching out and fortunately connected with the Urban League that was starting this program, the Entrepreneurship Center, supporting new businesses, but people of color, headed by people of color, and decided that we would make it's not the $100 million that Lily can give, but for what was for us a pretty substantial contribution. So trying to think about, again, why is it that we sort of have the resources we have, and how do we begin to redistribute them?
Thank you. There's a lot packed in there, and I think some of your questions that I see coming up that we'll get to in a few minutes maybe are some follow-up questions to that, but before we get there, I want to give Dave a chance to chime in here. So, Dave, you've been involved in all sorts of different community projects, but one of the ones I know that is near and dear to your heart is the Good Wages Initiative. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk more about that to folks here in case they aren't familiar, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's great to be here and be able to talk about it. So I've been sort of a full-time hunger person for about 15 years. Helped start Indie Hunger Network and a number of other things, and we've seen great progress in terms of the Indianapolis community coming together to respond to hunger and make sure people don't go hungry. We're doing a great job. But we looked at the data in 2019, right before the pandemic, record low unemployment. A couple of things. One, we knew that unemployment for persons of color was much higher, but overall, record low unemployment. And the number of people who needed food assistance had hardly declined at all in 10 years. And so, the arc of progress that we heard about this morning, right, there was no progress there, right? And so we realized we have to do something else besides, we have to keep feeding people. We can't let them go hungry. But we need to do something else. And so we got this idea from a nonprofit in North Carolina who certify and celebrate employers who pay a living wage as a way to encourage employers of all types to pay a living wage. So Employ Indy took this on. They're the nonprofit home for this. And we launched last April. United Way was the first to apply. I was really pleased about that. We have over 60 certified organizations at this point, from the largest employers to some very small employers. And the most important thing we were looking for was what employers needed to do in terms of increases in order to be able to apply for certification. So if people were already doing it, we're happy to celebrate them. That's a good thing. But what we really wanted was for people like Central Christian Church to look at themselves and go, oh, we are not where we should be. We'd like to be part of this, and so we're going to raise and to meet this standard. And I'm really happy to report that we've already seen over $5 million and increased wages on the part of certified employers in order to be certified. And we all, everybody in this room knows, you spread that $5 million across 2,000 employees or whatever it is, that is huge, right? When you're operating at the edge, that's a really life-changing increase. So really, really proud of that. But we have a long way to go. Obviously, 60 is a drop in the bucket relative to the number of employers. And if not just me, but my personal hope is not just that we'll certify a lot of employers, although that's clearly on the agenda. My hope is that we'll catalyze some change in how people think about it. Before we got started, our grant to get started was from the Lilly Endowment. We had a planning grant from them, and we went out and did focus interviews with 24 CEOs or CEO level people. And it was amazing. These were everyone, good-hearted people. It was amazing how many people did not know what the living wage was for Indianapolis. Even though the city had done a big study with the Brookings Institute and had make announcements, it was in the IBJ, there was a fair amount of publicity, but these folks, good folks, people who are plugged in, did not know what the wage was. And the second thing that they did not know what their lowest paid employees were paid. So they didn't know what the standard was. They didn't know where they were relative to the standard. So that's what I want to say is that this initiative, I hope, has the chance to get people aware and thinking about it and to just know. And there will be some employers that can't do this, right? They're trying to get people started with basic job skills, and maybe the best they can do is $15. But even just to have people know that this exists. Second thing, we had some interesting reactions about people who they just automatically think that you should pay the least you could possibly pay. And if I want to hire an MBA, PhD scientist like myself, if I find the talent that I need, why shouldn't I get the person who I'm going to have to pay the least, right? That's common sense. But if you aren't paying somebody enough to feed their family, that logic shouldn't apply, right? And so that's a real culture change that I hope this initiative will help us as a community to change.
Thank you for the leadership and bringing that. I know it wasn't just you, but I know that you were instrumental in it, Dave, of bringing that idea, that concept here and not letting go of it. I know that you had to talk to lots of people before it found its home and before getting that planning grant and moving it along. So thank you for your leadership in that. Absolutely. So Kimberly and Pastor McRae, the two of you, how did you hear about the Good Wages, and how did you end up getting your organizations end up connecting to it, and what kind of conversations? You shared a little bit about the conversation you had in your organization. Did that stem from Good Wages? You had mentioned also it came from your congregation. How do those two things cross over?
It sort of happened around the same time. It helps that Dave Miner's a member of my congregation, so we weren't going to be exempt from hearing about it. We're sort.
The moderator that was standing in front of the crowd that said, "Why aren't you doing this?"
Right. Yes. So I think the two kind of intersected. Yes. But I think honestly it came from the congregation before we brought the Good Wages initiative to them, as the timing worked out. So once we had moved in that direction as a congregation, then the certification process was relatively easy.
For us, we actually received an email from Employ Indy. And the Indianapolis Urban League definitely understands the importance of paying a livable wage. We have our preferred employer program where we partner with local employers that offer livable wages. So we as an agency knew it was extremely important for us to be able to look at the salaries that we were paying our staff members to make sure that we were paying a livable wage. How can we ask an employer to pay a livable wage and we're not paying a livable wage? So that was something that we did as an agency, is just reviewing all of the salaries of our staff and making sure that we were increasing everyone's salary to, not to say that they weren't making a great salary before, but just making sure that they were in fact earning a livable wage. And so when we were contacted by Employ Indy, for us it was a no-brainer because we were already paying a livable wage. We just wanted to be connected with an organization that understood the importance of the livable wage. And so we completed the application process and actually joined. So it's been a phenomenal experience for us. We are able to actually communicate to our program participants that not only does the IUL pay a livable wage, but we partner with other local employers that are paying livable wages as well. So that was extremely important to us as an agency.
Thank you. Thank you for that commitment that you made and seeing the connection, right? Seeing the connection that it's something that you're asking of others, and so you did that internal work. We were talking about the internal and the external, right? That it's important to do the internal work while you're also doing that external work. Well, let's turn to a few of the questions from our audience here. One of the things that that has, a few different people chimed in on is we're talking about integrating faith traditions into work, into community work, into the work of helping people to access livable wages. Some of those same historical faith traditions have been a source of trauma. And so how do we lean on those faith traditions and also embrace where those have gone awry, or have people who have stood in that light in maybe lifting up the message that was not in line with the faith tradition? What does that look like? Maybe Pastor McCrae, you could take an initial stab at that.
So I'm not sure exactly what kind of trauma people are referencing here. The way I think about this issue is that clearly, I would say our country is built on white supremacy, and religious institutions, primarily Christian traditions, were a primary factor in that. And so that has created trauma around race and around class, often intertwined. How we integrate when we've been the source of trauma, I think, is first about getting clear about that history. Our congregation has spent a fair amount of time in the last few years looking at systemic racism. We did things accessible to everybody. There's a wonderful podcast called Seeing White. It's a season of podcasts from Seen on Radio that kind of tell how racism is baked into the founding and the history of our country. We need to understand that better. We've done education of various kinds. I think we have to name the sources of trauma and the ways that our institutions have been involved and have been and still are in many ways complicit in the ongoing trauma, and repent for that participation and complicity, and figure out, repent means you turn away from something and figure out how ways to turn away from those practices and try to embrace new and liberating practices. It's pretty general, but I think it's the journey we're on.
I might add, faith communities can provide leadership. We heard about that right off the bat from Rabbi. not only by looking at their own situation in the particular congregation, but congregations are made up of lots of people, right? If the congregation is talking about it, then some of those people are business owners, business leaders, nonprofit leaders who can go out and make change in their organization. So I think the faith community has a tremendous opportunity. And in terms of dealing with some of the historical, we know, right, that persons of color are disproportionately represented in low-income jobs, right? And so if we make a difference on this, we are disproportionately assisting with correcting some of that. So I think the faith community has a tremendous opportunity through the Living Wage Initiative, through Good Wages Initiative, as it's known formally.
Thank you. I think it is really important to both see the opportunity, but also acknowledge the need for repentance. And I think as people of faith, that is always what we're called to do, right? Day in and day out, is to have enough self-reflection to understand our own role and own complicity and whatever that is that we are working toward, and the parts of us that are working against it, but also to look for that hope and that opportunity. And you can't do one without the other, right? You can't keep going without that constant call to repentance. And that's an important part of this ongoing community work. You can't walk alongside someone without that acknowledgement of your role, both in the opportunity and the hope, but also in the turning away from the sin that got us there. And we all need to own that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So on a somewhat similar topic, someone else brought up the question about how do we as a community, also particularly a faith community, be able to respond in a way that doesn't get us caught in white saviorism, in coming to save the day and fixing the problem for. We've been pretty careful today. I think you've probably heard from the beginning all the way through now, walking alongside, being supportive, but it is an individual's journey, and it is not up for any one of us to fix or solve. But we are called to walk alongside. But that can be hard to do when there's power differentials, right? There's resource differentials. So how do you approach that? How do we make sure that we're not, that we're coming alongside, but we're not trying to be the savior in the midst of this?
So I guess the key word for me would be partnership, that it is nobody does it alone, really, and that we would never want even to suggest that we have an answer for somebody else, that we would know better than the people who are closest to the pain of how to address the pain, how to get out of that. So partnership, we have a partnership with the Urban League. We don't tell them what we think they should do with our money because we don't know. They know a lot better. I think partnerships, through coalition work. I mean, there are coalitions in this city. We and a number of other congregations make up Faith in Indiana. And again, it is the people who are closest to the pain are the ones who are setting the agenda for solutions to those root causes of poverty and injustice. The Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance is an interfaith effort that is working. We try to, those of us who are not experiencing poverty, listen more than we should listen more than we talk, and should follow more than we lead. It still doesn't get us out of that dilemma and the trap of feeling or acting like we are saving the day, but it at least helps us to avoid it.
Thank you.
One mechanism that I think the community is doing more of, but there's a lot more that could be done, is having voices of lived experience directly in the power conversations. So serving on boards of directors, advisory councils, a variety of ways. Yeah, thank you.
Kim, for the Quality of Life Initiative, there was a couple different questions that popped up about that. One is, what is the impact and how many people are expected to be served? I know there was another one earlier that was around all the pressure that the Urban League is under in this moment, and kind of how are you navigating that? So maybe you could kind of take both of those.
Sure. If I could share, is that we as the Indianapolis Urban League, we did not receive the $100 million ourselves. So let me be very, very clear on that. That money was actually forwarded to the National Urban League office. And so in partnership with the National Urban League office, we're working very closely with other community-based organizations, the African American Quality of Life Initiative, so on and so forth, and being able to administer these dollars. So we do not have these dollars. But I will say that we as an agency understand the importance of being able to work very, very closely with those that are doing the work and providing them with access to different resources and funding for them to be able to expand some of the great work that they're already doing. Of course, we are challenged on a daily basis. People are asking the questions, but I can share that we just recently released the names of the second round of grantees. The first round of grantees, I believe, was announced maybe in November or December. So these organizations are just now starting to do the work. And so Tony Mason, again, being very, very transparent, has reminded all of these organizations that you have to do the work. And so the dollars are actually being awarded in 2 disbursements. So when you are completing reports, and we all know that you have to complete reports showing that you're meeting the outcomes and goals that you have projected, if you are not meeting those goals and reports, you're putting yourself in that agency in a position of not being able to receive that second disbursement. Because we have to, as an agency and as the National Urban League, be able to answer to the work that is supposed to be done. So we're putting the ownership on those organizations that have actually received those funds, because you're saying that you're doing the work. That is great. We're also encouraging those organizations to partner with other agencies. And so if you are a part of an organization that is actually doing the work and you know that you could actually partner with one of those grantees, it would be smart to be able to leverage those dollars to be able to assist you with meeting the needs of the community as well. So we're just basically encouraging individuals to be really, really smart about the funding and making sure that you're doing to work, because you will have to answer to every single dime that has been awarded to you, because we want to make sure that the work is being done. And last I want to share is that that particular grant award, if I'm not mistaken, is over the course of 4 years, 4 or 5 years if I'm not mistaken, because we recognize that it is going to take time to do the planning. It's going to take time to be able to hire the staff. It's going to take time to be able to meet the outcomes, those deliverables that you actually projected, in addition to being able to report out. So we understand, because we're a nonprofit ourselves, the importance of being able to report out on the services that you're providing and just being consistent with that information.
Thank you. I know in conversations that I've had with Tony, he is quick to say, like, the $100 million is not in the vault in the basement, right? That's not how this works, because it was a lot of money and it was a huge announcement. And so it does put a lot of pressure on your organization, and you all have been handling it with grace and with smiles, and it's greatly appreciated, because I absolutely believe in the outcomes that you're going to produce in partnership with all those other organizations. How do we start to get at diversifying our volunteers and other connections to our organizations? So, particularly if you're thinking, from a faith-based perspective, what does that look like into, an organization like the Urban League but also from a congregation perspective, what does that look like for your congregants as they're looking to volunteer? So kind of from both sides of it, how can we begin to get at diversifying our volunteers?
Okay, I can start. We actually, to address the immediate need for food insecurities, the IUL actually started hosting a weekly food distribution. We are now in next week will be our 107th week of doing this food distribution. And so we started in April of 2020. We cannot do it alone. We have served thousands of not only Marion County residents, but surrounding communities as well. And so we have partnered with a number of local organizations. We have employers that will come and actually volunteer because we are serving a lot of individuals from all walks of life. It's very, very humbling to see someone pull up in a BMW that is struggling with being able to provide food for their families. And so we are just so thankful, so appreciative of having those local organizations, those employers that will actually come and say, hey, let's volunteer, let's put food inside of the vehicles, let's come and bag the groceries or what have you. So we have actually had a very, very diverse group of individuals from all walks of life, including our program participants that come in and volunteer as well. And so we really promote the opportunity for any organization, any individual that is actually open to coming at 7 a.m. next Tuesday. If anyone who's interested, we'll be there at 7 a.m. that wants to come and actually volunteer. And so those efforts allow us to be able to increase our diverse volunteer case load, if you will. So we do have many, many individuals from all walks of life representing different types of cultures that will come and volunteer. And I think that our food giveaway actually opened the door to this.
Thanks.
So most volunteers in congregations are members of congregations. So if a congregation is monolithic in terms of race or class or ethnicity, the volunteers probably will be as well. So in some ways the question is, how do we diversify our congregations, which is, challenging, but not impossible. But I think one other way to think about that question is, I think in our context at Central Christian Church about our sort of week-to-week ministries with the community, and this is not anything new to probably anybody here, but we don't. It doesn't have to. The volunteers don't have to be the members who don't need the ministry that is being offered, and so. We do have in our various food and clothing ministries folks who originally came because they needed food or clothing and then have decided to help because people want to help. They want to be able to, share with others. So again, it's related to the question about saviorism. So just getting out of the mentality of we're the ones that have and they are the ones that need. We all have and we all need. It's just at different times, it's different things.
We all have and we all need. And not just in the physical sense, right? But in the spiritual sense, and that we all have a need to serve, and we all have the need to receive being served. And I think that starts to get at that unpacking the white saviorism too. Thank you for that.
And working alongside people and having a chance to get to know them and really get to see who they are and not just give them something. I think we have a new opportunity vehicle for that, a new film that was produced last fall called The Working Hungry, which is available. A lot of congregations and food pantries and food banks are showing it. We had a showing A few weeks ago at Second Presbyterian, it was mostly the volunteers from their food pantry that were there that night. And talking afterwards, Lisa Enright, who runs their food pantry, said, I think they learned a lot, because before they were just sort of handing things to people as they came through the line. So looking for ways to really get to know people and not just hand them something.
Yeah. So while you have the microphone, Dave, one of the questions that came up was around good wages specifically. Is it involved in policy and particularly around the minimum wage? And if so, how? And if not, will it? Or what does that look like?
That's a great question. The minimum wage, there's half of economists that think that raising it a bunch would be a good thing, and half of economists think it would not. And so there's a real clear division about this. So the Good Wage Initiative, we decided not to get caught up in that we were concerned whether anything will ever happen with that, sadly. And so we decided to do this. The Good Wages is voluntary. If an organization wants to get the benefits of it, great. If they choose not to, that's their choice. So personally, I think we need to raise the minimum wage, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. And that's a national conversation. So
thanks. One more follow-up for you. Where can they find the movie if they want to, the Hunger movie?
Thank you. Go on the Indie Hunger Network website, which is indiehunger.org. And there's a tab in there for the working hungry, and there's a discussion guide, and you can stream it from there, and you can find a listing. I'm really excited. We've got 60 planned showings at this point, completed or planned around the state. So it's really getting a lot of, people are finding it useful, which I'm really delighted about. So,
what's the call to action at the end of that?
There are two things that are mentioned in there. It's mostly about the challenges, but we didn't want to just leave people with that. So there are two things that are mentioned. One is Cook Medical's work on the east side, and the second one is the Good Wages Initiative. So we're about to tack on a formal call to action at the end, which will mention advocacy, particularly through Bread for the World, groups like Indie Hunger Network. We're the only community in Indiana that has that kind of collaboration. It'd be great to see some in other cities. And then finally, the Good Wage Initiative. And again, that's Marion County only at this point. Would love to see that expanding elsewhere.
Terrific. Thank you. So one of the questions up here is a big one. How do we create equitable and inclusive work environments? And we talked about that from a wage standpoint. Are there other things that we should be thinking about, talking about? What does that look like for organizations that have, you've now taken on the Living Wage Initiative? What's next? How do you continue to work toward equitable and inclusive work environments?
Sure. One of the things that I think that we have done a great job of doing is hiring individuals who come through our programming. We have approximately 7 or 8 individuals currently on staff that have actually come through our New Beginnings program. These individuals, they represent all walks of life. We have had individuals that have been released from incarceration, individuals that have struggled with addiction, individuals that have struggled with homelessness. And so for us as an agency, it was a very, very smart decision for us to be able to hire individuals from all walks of life that have all different types of experiences, because that allows us to be able to provide great services to individuals who are in that same particular situation. So they are actually experts. One of the things that we definitely recognize is that we do not use the cookie cutter approach. And what I mean by that is, yes, we have our standard policies and procedures, but if I have someone who has come to me sharing that they are or they have relapsed, and this person has missed maybe a week of work, but they've been calling me, I know that I need to have a conversation with our president and CEO and say, hey, listen, I do not want to suspend this individual for missing so many days of work. Let's put this individual into, or assist them with getting into a treatment program of some sort. So we're able to pivot and adjust our own internal policies to be able to assist the staff that we know very well in need. We make a conscious effort to show mercy and grace to everyone that comes through our doors and everyone that is on staff. And so that is the one thing that I think that we do very, very well as an agency, is recognizing that sometimes you just cannot have a conversation with someone the same way that you could another individual, recognizing that, okay, because you and I have had a conversation, and that's one of the things that I do as a supervisor, I know pretty much everything about every staff member that reports to me. And I appreciate that because they feel comfortable coming to me and saying to me, Kim, I'm dealing with this, Kim, I'm dealing with that. So if something happens and I'm in a better position to be able to have a conversation with whomever and say, listen, let's provide that individual with some additional resources, because if we don't, they're going to lose their job. Then they're going to lose their housing. And then if they're on drugs or if they've struggled with addiction, they may very well relapse. So that's one of the things that we do as an agency, is that we recognize that we have people from all walks of life and that we need to adjust and pivot just slightly to be able to make sure that they have the support that they need. So that's what we do as an agency.
Thank you for that leadership.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So one of the other pieces that that can come up when we think about economic justice and justice in the workplace is around where we spend our money. And so one of the questions from the audience is about how to do a better job of hiring minority-owned businesses. What have you done, any of you individually, and being able to strengthen that for your organization?
Sure. If I could share, there are some absolutely phenomenal minority-owned businesses, absolutely phenomenal. But some of those small business owners struggle with being able to promote their goods or services.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll connect with agencies like, for example, Indiana Black Expo has an absolutely phenomenal entrepreneur program. Black Business Matters is another one. We launched our Entrepreneurship Center program in August of 2021. I would encourage you that if you're interested in actually hiring a minority-owned business, if you are unfamiliar with any yourselves, connect with some of these organizations that actually have entrepreneurship programs and asking them, do you have someone who you might be able to recommend? We have a very, very long list of entrepreneurs that actually are enrolled in our program. So does Indiana Black Expo and a number of other organizations. Make those calls and have those conversations, because there are some great minority-owned businesses, and they would really appreciate you supporting them by hiring them to provide a service and providing goods as well.
And a good first step around that, if I can step out of my moderator role for a second, something that we did as an organization was just doing an audit of how and where we are spending our dollars, because it was surprising when you go through the level of detail, whether you're a small congregation or a large nonprofit. We all spend our dollars somewhere, and sometimes we don't think about that each step along the way. And it was really helpful to bring it to our attention even before you get to the step of then, where else are you putting in? I think, Kimberly, you did a great job of, where else can you be investing those dollars? But make yourself aware of where you already are spending is really important. So then you can see, okay, well, we may not be able to move all the dollars to a different direction, but over time, here's our goal, and here's how we're going to align it in that way. It can be really helpful. We are just about at time, so I want to give our guests a chance to just wrap us up for the day. No pressure. But we have those who have stuck with us to the end. We are grateful to you, audience members, who have stayed until this 3 o'clock time. And hopefully all of you will also stay for after 3 o'clock when we have the grantees who are going to be sharing out in the lobby area. But before we get to that, just what should people take away from today? From, maybe it's what you took away from today, from something else you've heard. Maybe it's something that's burning on your heart from the work that you're doing. But what is your best advice to send off this group who, cares deeply about justice and wants to do more, to do better? What should we share? Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Just things that we have heard today. I feel like a lot of this conversation, or at least took me back to Rabbi Sharon Brous and the image of God. How do we create equitable and just workplaces? How do we pay people? If we really can live out of that sense of every human has infinite worth, is worthy of equality, then that gets us a long way. Other things that just have jumped out at me through the day are use what you've got. Every one of us comes from a different organization with different resources, different environment, different challenges, but we all have something that we can use to get us a little bit further along the way. And yes, it is incremental, and I would love to find a way for it to be more revolutionary than incremental, but maybe we'll get there. And in the meantime, we use what we have, we open ourselves to the opportunities that God and life and the universe will put in front of us, and try to respond and engage appropriately.
Thank you.
I would just say that there are some absolutely phenomenal community-based organizations to partner with. Don't hesitate to reach out. Ask if you have a question. Be open. Show others mercy and grace. The same mercy and grace has been shown to you. That's my motto. But just taking advantage of having the conversations with those that are actually doing the work and being sincere. Being sincere is extremely important, but there are some great organizations, and so I would just really challenge you to make a couple phone calls, schedule a meeting, a 15-minute, 20-minute Zoom call, and just see what you can do to be able to assist, and just be willing and open to learn.
Sort of building on that, I'm coming out with hope. These are always so encouraging, but we need more people in the room, right? So we need to reach out to folks we know, invite them to participate in things, come see things, come experience things. We need to grow this as a movement. That comes back to each of us to invite more people into the circle.
Thank you, Dave. So invite more people, pick up the phone and call and do something. See the holy. This work is holy work. That was one of the things that struck me at the very beginning, that labor is holy and that we are all called to be a part of that and to help others find that holiness in themselves. And so thank you for being a part of that and wanting to grow that in yourself here today as we all join together. Learning is a part of growing and part of that self-reflection. Sometimes it's part of that repentance that we talked about earlier. And so I'm really grateful to have spent this afternoon with you and look forward to learning more from our grantees. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you to all of you for the ways that you guys have taken big steps in being a leader and being proactive to put your faith into action. So we really appreciate you, and we're excited for the last portion of the day. We have cookies and water and lemonade in the common room, and we have our grantees. I really encourage you to reach out, introduce yourself, get to know each other. And for those of you who are still here at 3:30 in the common room, I do have an announcement to make. So I will see you then. Have a wonderful day.